Hello and welcome. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. After days of cross-border attacks between Israel and Hezbollah, a deadly Israeli airstrike hits the southern Beirut suburbs. Reports members of Hezbollah's command unit were killed in the strike, including the organization's number 2 and head of special forces, Ibrahim Akil. And Israel's military claims more Hezbollah commanders were killed in the attack. A statement from the organization is expected shortly. Welcome. Well, we do begin in the Lebanese capital, where there was a loud explosion this afternoon in the city's southern suburbs. A strike on an area of Beirut that is known to be a Hezbollah stronghold, with the Israeli military saying it carried out what it called a targeted strike in that area. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Beirut-based journalist Hannah Mccarthy. Hannah, a lot happening there in Beirut today. What do we know so far about this strike? There's actually a lot of conflicting reports and statements coming out about who was targeted and how many were killed.
Sure. So the Ministry of Health has released a statement saying 9 people have been killed and nearly 60 injured, and we understand there are children among that number, although that is still being confirmed. And again, we also understand that Ibrahim Akil was killed in this strike. And we understand that from initial reports, it's that he was injured in the pager attack earlier this week and he left hospital this morning. And it looks like a major security kind of mess up for him to have been discharged from hospital and then gone to what seems like a meeting with other Hezbollah commanders. And again, we're kind of relying more on the Israeli military statements about the details for this. Hezbollah haven't released a statement yet. So again, we're kind of relying a bit more on these Israeli reports of what happened. So we do need more detail from Hezbollah. They've suggested that a whole cadre of Hezbollah commanders have been killed in this, but they haven't confirmed yet. And again, they haven't officially confirmed that Ibrahim Akil, who basically took over from Fouad Shakur, who was assassinated at the end of July in southern Beirut in a similar style attack.
Yeah, and indeed, Ibrahim Akil had a $7 million bounty on his head. What else can you tell us about him and why he was such a target for Israel?
Sure. So Ibrahim Akil, that bounty was actually only placed on his head last April by the US government. So they were particularly keen for information about his whereabouts because of his involvement in the attacks in the 80s on the US Embassy and the US Marine barracks, where over 240 Marines were killed. So it's a huge event in American military history. It's one of the biggest losses of life for them, I think, in one day. So he did represent a significant target for the US. The US has said they had no advanced warning of this operation. Obviously, there was some suggestion online that, given the value of Akil to the US government, that maybe there was US intelligence or maybe there was more coordination than they're letting on. Again, more details still coming out about that.
And, let's talk about the destruction to the neighborhood, a residential neighborhood in southern Beirut. Israel's military claiming that this was targeted. However, as you mentioned at the start there, potentially anywhere upwards of 60 people injured, maybe 9 people killed again, still waiting full confirmation and details of that. But the video is showing quite serious destruction to this neighborhood.
Sure. So the IDF immediately put out a press announcement that they had conducted a targeted strike in Beirut, unlike with the pager attacks earlier this week, where they never took responsibility publicly, at least. And I think it's important to distinguish this type of attack from maybe the attack that we saw earlier in the year in Beirut, which took out a Hamas commander. And we saw kind of from footage of that attack that it was a target very much focused on one room in a building. I mean, if you see the pictures, it's basically just, one room has been taken out of the building. Whereas in this case, it looks like 2 buildings have been leveled. It's a very substantial attack. And I think it's a very expansive interpretation of the word targeted to suggest this was targeted, it was a busy kind of civilian area. There was people passing by in the street. There was domestic workers from Ethiopia who described having to get themselves out of buildings, that were full of rubble. So again, this was a target that has had a destructive effect on a civilian neighborhood.
Look, it's been a very dramatic week in Lebanon, in Beirut and across other parts of Lebanon as well. How much more are you braced for, you being there in Beirut this weekend? How much are people talking about what might be to come?
I think everyone's just very much alert at the moment. There's question marks, how will funerals be conducted for the Hezbollah members who've been killed today? We've already had detonations at the funerals of Hezbollah members who were killed in the pager attacks. There's going to be a real heightened sense of paranoia about any public gathering, I think, at the moment. And I think what this attack does is it underscores that the pager attacks and the walkie-talkie attacks, these are an intelligence breach and a security breach that will ripple for weeks to come. And I think what we've seen is because so many Hezbollah members, were brought to hospitals and medical centres, that there was a huge intelligence gathering opportunity for the Israelis, and they seem to have put it to use today. Again, we don't have final confirmation of that, but it certainly seems like the pager attacks created an opportunity for Israel to track senior Hezbollah targets that they had not been able to successfully target before.
Beirut-based journalist Hannah Mccarthy speaking to us from there this evening. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's dive deeper into the foreign policy ramifications of this for countries everywhere, but of course with Israel and Lebanon right in front of us, and speak to Lebanese-American foreign policy specialist and former advisor to Donald Trump and Mitt Romney, Walid Phares. Sir, thank you for making time. Let's begin with the latest details from this strike on Beirut this afternoon. If indeed Hezbollah's Ibrahim Akil was killed in this strike, as Israel is claiming, how important is this?
Every strike the Israelis are conducting, and every time they score a strike against a high-ranking official, that started with the 2 waves that we've seen of the explosives, but from there on, it looks like that they are targeting the whole hierarchy, the whole combat hierarchy, not the politicians at this point, is important for the Israelis. But on the long run, the question is, even if the Israelis crumble that one structure, would it not be replaced with time? So eventually what Israel is gaining is a long time enough for them to actually close the dossier in Gaza. And I would add one thing, probably the American elections. So that's what the strategy of the Israelis seems to be.
So you think this was all coordinated? There was arguments earlier in the week that the Israelis were forced to act sooner on their coordinated explosion device attack, if indeed it was them behind it, because they haven't claimed official responsibility yet. But the pager explosions, the walkie-talkie explosions, and now we're talking about this attack supposedly killing Ibrahim Akil and on the command structure of Hezbollah. Do you think this was all conceived of and composed to happen at this time, and you're saying in the lead up to the US election?
Look, these are analyses that we are advancing because the military and intelligence groups within the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and others, they present a plan. They actually present a strategy for their leadership. So that they have done it over the past 6 months. We realize now even older than that. They have always had plans in engaging with Hezbollah. Hezbollah does the same. They have plans to reach Haifa and Tel Aviv and etc. The only difference is that at the highest level, that would be the war cabinet and the prime minister, they decide on the timing. Now, certainly we're going to hear stories, right and left reports. Some may be true, some may be not, that they had to rush. They had to rush because Hezbollah's counterintelligence was about to know. We don't know that, but what we know is that there are 2 very important benchmarks. After the US elections, there's going to be a change, most likely. That change depends on which administration is going to be formed, and the Israelis have to, if they have to rush, it will be because of that reason, not just because Hezbollah was about to discover.
Look, Mr. Phares, there's been arguments today that what Israel is doing currently in Lebanon, what it did today regarding Beirut, and then, of course, the cross-border strikes as well, it's trying to decouple what's happening between what it's doing in Gaza and what it's doing with Lebanon. Do you agree with that argument?
Yeah, there are a lot of arguments, analytical arguments, but if you look at it from a geopolitical perspective, they are delaying. They are actually not catching time quickly. Demands of ceasefire, and because there is a more than a light pressure by the Biden administration. That's why I would link it actually to what is the U.S. position. If the U.S. position would have been, let's say, under Trump, given an example, then the Israelis would have had more green light on Gaza to finish quickly or to take action in a different way. The same with regard to Hezbollah. So it looks logically that the Israeli government wants to deter Hezbollah as they are progressing against Hamas. Do we call it decoupling? Maybe on the political media level, but it seems to me it's well coordinated within the decision-making ranks inside Israel.
Okay, well, as you've described there, the US involvement in this, or the role that they could play from afar. Let's talk about Western intervention, what can be done to help de-escalate the situation. UN Security Council meeting later on today. I mean, can that have any impact?
Unfortunately, my answer is no. The UN Security Council is already divided on another war. That's why Russia and China will have the veto power. You know, they can discuss with the US, but what they're going to discuss is also what do we do in Ukraine? And most likely before the elections, I am not sure that we're going to see a serious, Security Council resolution under Chapter 7 that would impose solutions. We may get statements by the Security Council. We may get a resolution on humanitarian matters, but it is a little bit late in the game. I think even the Security Council will have to, the forces of the Security Council will have to wait for our elections here.
What about US funding to Israel? There's also an argument that the great deal of funding, the huge amount of funding that the US gives to Israel has actually somehow deterred a greater escalation of the situation because it gives the US leverage in negotiating or mediating the situation and trying to restrain Israel. Do you buy that?
Well, I kind of rent that, not buy it in the sense that those tools would have been more efficient, let's say, after October 7 and the months after October 7. But once we got into our election seasons, I mean, both sides, both campaigns are claiming that they are supporting Israel all the way. Obviously, Donald Trump support all the way and can claim that Mr. Netanyahu is a friend and ally. They worked together for 4 years. But at the same time, the Kamala campaign is also claiming that they will provide Israel with all what they want. So at this point in time, it's an Israel time as we're getting closer to the elections. But I am pretty sure, depending on who's going to be in the White House, policies are going to be very different. I mean, if it's Trump, you're going to get the same alliance and support that he had provided Israel in his 4 years. If it's Kamala, what's going to happen is a more pressure on Israel and a different resolution with regard to the United States, meaning two-state solution, and of course a rigid ceasefire. That would be the policy for the next 4 years.
Let's refocus about what's happening right now in Lebanon. What are the chances, you think, that we might actually see Israeli ground invasion into Lebanon, a meaningful ground invasion?
Actually, if we listened carefully to the speech of Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, a couple of days ago, that's what he was focusing on. Actually, that would be to the advantage of Hezbollah, their ideal situation, if Israel tries to move in, because they believe that with the current topography of South Lebanon, with the weapons they have, I mean, they lost a lot of cadre, but they didn't lose yet reserves or big weapons that they have. Or remember that Hezbollah has an open path, open corridor, some would call it highway through Syria and Iraq into Iran, and supplies could come. Now, if Israel wants to invade Lebanon or a piece of Lebanon, I think that would involve a larger decision. That one will have to integrate the United States, because logistically Israel will need a support by the United States if it's really fighting on two fronts. If their military are inside Gaza and now inside Lebanon, that's not an easy matter.
It's certainly not. Do you think Israel is able to continue fighting on those both fronts?
Israel has the logistics that would allow it to do what it is doing right now, meaning little progress on the ground in Gaza until Rafah is gone. That's their strategic vision. And what would happen there is then Israel and the US and 2 to 3 Arab countries will have to meet and decide on a security plan. That's the vision. In southern Lebanon, there is no security plan. There is a de facto plan. So if Israel at one point, not now, at one point decide to move in and establish a safe zone, security zone, what's going to happen is that the lines of engagement are going to just go north. So wherever Hezbollah will withdraw to, because Hezbollah may need to withdraw if this campaign of Israel's action against its structure continues. So we may see a withdrawal by Hezbollah, but its guerrilla will stay in. That's why I call it a long war.
You mentioned that word war. In terms of Lebanon being at war, short of it being officially called that, is it essentially in de facto war now?
First of all, I may have not pronounced it well, a long war. This is going to be a long war, not necessarily a world war. But time is going to depend on, again, and keep going back to that matter, what policy is going to be in Washington, but also in Europe. There are changes that are happening in Europe one way or another. It's going to be linked to the big negotiations between the next administration and Russia. So it's really more or less intertwined with this. But on the ground, the conclusion that many among us analysts believe is going to be the one, if Israel cannot change the geopolitics of Lebanon, and they tried in 1982, it was very difficult, and there was a withdrawal after that. We don't know if the Israelis have in mind to change the actual system, meaning to isolate Hezbollah inside Lebanon, profiting from the fact that some of the Arab countries, are on the other side, and the Syrian opposition, maybe Saudis, UAE, we don't know at this point in time. But that's a big architecture. That's a big architecture to change the position of Hezbollah. Or if Tehran decides to a ceasefire, unilateral ceasefire on the South Lebanon front without really demanding the same for Gaza. That's also another possibility.
Interesting. Look, it's been really good speaking to you, foreign policy specialist, former advisor to Donald Trump and Mitt Romney, Walid Phares. Well, Mr. Phares, they're bringing up the role that the US plays in all of this. To go into that a bit deeper, let's now bring in former Middle East negotiator and advisor to the US State Department, Aaron David Miller. So good to speak to you too. Look, I want to start with a piece that was published in the Washington Post today containing comments from you that were particularly interesting. You put forward a theory that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu approved of this week's exploding device attacks, if indeed Israel were behind it. They haven't claimed responsibility yet, as an operation to boost his own political fortunes. Talk to us more about that.
Well, I'm basing this on a yet-to-be-confirmed analysis on why the Israelis acted when they did. It's clear why they decided to penetrate Hezbollah's comms, both with pagers and walkie-talkies. That was presumably intended to be a prelude to a major military operation, which would have knocked out not only Hezbollah, wounded Hezbollah operatives, but knocked out their capacity to communicate with one another. But there is no major Israeli military ground campaign. At least there hasn't been one yet, and they've now lost the element of surprise. So the question remained, why did they seek to activate these devices now? And one working theory is that Hezbollah and or Iran were on the cusp of discovering what the Israelis had done. Another theory is that Mr. Netanyahu, that it was not the case, and Mr. Netanyahu, in an effort to boost his political fortunes, pushed the intelligence organizations to go ahead and do this. So we don't know. All I suggested was that most everything Benjamin Netanyahu has done over the course of the last 11 months is driven and tethered to one overriding objective, which is to maintain himself in power. On trial for bribery. This is no great secret, nor is it crude, cheap politics. He's on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in a Jerusalem district court, now 4 years running. He's due to testify, maybe he'll testify, in December if he loses power. If he cannot create a coalition that will sustain him in power, he faces one of two choices. One, a possible conviction, and Ehud Olmert went to prison for only one of the former prime minister, for only one of the charges that Mr. Netanyahu's accused of, or cut a plea deal which drives him out of politics. So that was my only point in making that. I have no idea, and nor does anyone else, except Israelis, why they decided to detonate these devices.
I mean, you talked there of a wider coordinated military strategy that maybe Israel were forced to act early and they didn't get the chance. Short of a ground invasion, though, we have seen a strike on the southern Beirut suburb this afternoon, supposedly, reportedly from an F-35 jet, taking out, the Israelis say, a senior Hezbollah commander. Is this part of their military strategy? Are they actually acting this out now? It's just not with the ground troops.
Well, I mean, that's like saying Switzerland would be a different country if it weren't for the Alps. I mean, the reality is that the ground troops are the decisive turning point or inflection point in any Israeli military operation, certainly one in southern Lebanon. They haven't been involved in any serious ground campaign in the north since the summer of 2006, and that operation did not go very well. No, I think this is still part of Israel's campaign. The assassination of Fuad Shukr on July 30th. They didn't claim responsibility for killing Ismail Haniyeh by a remote-controlled detonated device in Tehran on July 31st. This is part and parcel of their campaign to target Hezbollah's senior officials and commanders. Whether this is going to presage a major military operation is yet to be seen. I made the point, and I think it's sadly true, that we are witnessing three wars of attrition. One between Israel and Hamas, one between Israel and Hezbollah, and one between Israel and Iran. There is no diplomatic end state for either of these. The best you're going to be able to do is to deter, contain, and maybe, through a set of transactional arrangements. For example, what Amos Hochstein, the U.S. mediator, is proposing, which frankly would be a diplomatic off-ramp for Hezbollah should they choose to take it. But I think it's very problematic because it doesn't involve Gaza, number one. And number two, you know, the Israeli-Hezbollah conflict is not the same as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There you have borders, security, Jerusalem, refugees, the core permanent status issues, which are legitimate and need to be resolved. Here, you have an organization in Lebanon whose existence, literally, whose physical and political existence is tied not to the establishment of Israeli-Lebanese relationships, but its legitimacy is tied with its defense of Lebanese interests. And Mr. Hochstein negotiated the maritime border a year or two ago with the acquiescence of Iran and Hezbollah. And there are a dozen points on the land border that if you actually did use the diplomatic off-ramp, many of those points would be resolved in Lebanon's favor. My concern is that Hezbollah has no intention and no interest. You cannot satisfy Hezbollah's requirements because that would undermine their mandate as a proxy of Iran and as a defender of Lebanese national interests. And that's clearly not doing the Lebanese people much good.
Look, while we've got you, it would be certainly remiss, and certainly given everything that's happening and the situation in Lebanon and with Israel fighting on both fronts at the moment, if not three fronts as you described there, not to talk about Gaza and efforts towards a ceasefire plan. Just a few weeks ago, US officials saying they presented a take it or leave it plan proposal to Israel and Hamas, or they wanted to, regards Gaza, but nothing seemed to come of that. Why was that?
It's because the two principal decision makers, the only two people who count, sadly, in terms of finding a way to alleviate the misery to the 2+ million people of Gaza, free the hostages, bring some solace to their families living in debt. The two principal decision makers, Yahya Sinwar on one hand and Benjamin Netanyahu on the other, simply have concluded that not making a deal is much better suited to their interests than actually concluding. And based on my experience in Arab-Israeli negotiations, they succeed only when the parties are in a hurry. And there's no urgency here, I'm afraid, on the part of Netanyahu or Sinwar. Understandably, the one party that is in a hurry is the Biden administration.
It's fascinating speaking to you. Thank you for making time for us. Former Middle East negotiator and advisor to the US State Department, Aaron David Miller.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as the situation between Israel and Lebanon continues to escalate, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has been speaking to crowds at the Israeli-American Council Summit, where participants were remembering the events of October 7th. The former US president appealing for more votes and pledging to get all hostages freed by Hamas from Gaza if he gets back into power, saying he believes the upcoming US elections critical to Israel because if his opponent Kamala Harris becomes president, it'll be the end of the country. Carolyn Malone reports from Washington.
Well, a busy Thursday night of events here at the Israeli-American Council Summit, during which we heard from a former hostage, a hostage that was held by Hamas in Israel. We heard from family members of people who are either killed in some of the Hamas attacks or those who still have family members being held hostage in Gaza. At the highlight of events on Thursday night was a speech by Donald Trump, the former US president. In that speech, he very much appealed to the Americans and the audience to vote for him in the upcoming presidential election, saying that if he gets into power, then Israel has, a strong friend at the top of the White House. But if his competitor, Kamala Harris, gets into power, then people that vote for her are foolish because it would pretty much spell the end for Israel as far as he sees it. He gave some references to his previous time in office. He spoke of some of the agreements and deals that he made, including the Abraham Accords. Overall, though, it's been quite a somber event here, and certainly people have been remembering October the 7th. Of course, that's nearly a year ago now when the Hamas attack on Israel led to Israel's retaliation and has led to a huge amount of civilian deaths, particularly in Gaza, with real concern now over this escalation. Overall, the US is among those countries trying to have a diplomatic deal, trying to have an agreement, a ceasefire deal, the release of hostages. And that's something that Trump said if he gets back into power, he will make sure happens. He didn't give specifics on how that would happen, but he said that's one of his pledges. Certainly, though, with this increase in tension and escalation and violence that we're seeing in the region, it is looking increasingly difficult for the US to even move forward and push forward and help all sides try to come to any kind of negotiation or deal. Certainly, though, for the people at this summit, they very much want to see an end to the fighting so that these hostages can be released. Caroline Malone, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Now let us have a look at some other international news from the day. Qatar Airways, the latest airline to impose restrictions in response to the current conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, banning pagers and walkie-talkies on board all flights departing Beirut until further notice after a series of coordinated explosions earlier in the week. Russia's defense ministry saying it destroyed 3 Ukrainian drones over Kursk and Belgorod last night in what it's calling a terror attack. Both sides increasingly using drones as a means of attack on each other, with footage earlier this week showing a large fireball and smoke from a Russian ammunitions depot allegedly struck by a drone. At least one elderly woman killed and 2 others wounded by Russian strikes in Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. The governor calling alleged Russian forces bombing the area 161 times in 23 hours, targeting infrastructure and residential buildings. Ukraine's President Zelensky, meanwhile, scheduled for a US visit next week to address the UN Security Council. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump saying he will probably meet him, despite previously describing US aid to the country as a waste of money. Staying with this story, Europe sending $39 billion in loans to Ukraine to help it get through attacks this winter. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announcing this on a trip to Kyiv, part of a wider plan to raise funds from frozen Russian assets. And to some business news now. General Motors recalling more than 440,000 pickup trucks and SUVs in the US due to issues with brake fluid. Highway officials saying a warning light might not show when there's a loss of fluid. GM promising to update software free of charge. And another recall, this time for Mercedes-Benz and its Chinese joint venture with Bake Motor, recalling over 500,000 imported and China-manufactured vehicles after China's regulator found issues with the wheel speed sensor in hot and humid environments. Embattled plane maker Boeing temporarily furloughing tens of thousands of white-collar employees This amidst strikes by around 30,000 workers, which have halted production of some of their best-selling aircraft. And a plant at the heart of the worst nuclear accident in American history set to restart operations in a deal to sell power to Microsoft. 3 Mile Island, as it's known, involved in plans for a 20-year deal that would restart the Unit 1 reactor. Well, let's get a recap of our top stories tonight. A deadly Israeli airstrike hits the southern suburbs of Beirut after days of cross-border attacks between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah saying its number 2 and head of special forces Ibrahim Akil killed in the strikes. The group expected to make a statement tonight following claims by the Israeli military that more Hezbollah commanders were killed in the attack. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Riz Khan. And at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join Tom Burges Watson for Global News Today with special guest, the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Fouad Siniora.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation. Hello, I'm Riz Khan. As many as 1 billion people around the world are obese. That's a number worth considering for a moment. It amounts to 1 in 8 people walking on planet Earth today. In the US alone, 3 out of every 4 people are obese or overweight. That's 75% of the population. So how did we get to this situation? Are processed foods to blame? How about our increasingly sedentary lifestyles? And what can be done to solve the problem? For millions of people, the answer to that final question is a new generation of weight loss drugs with names such as Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro and Zepbound. Originally created to tackle type 2 diabetes, they've also proved successful in dropping body weight by 15 to 20% and significantly reducing the risk of heart attacks. Self-administered by simple injections, the drugs have been likened by some to a miracle cure. Well, nearly half of all Americans say they want to get their hands on them. But there are downsides too. There's a long list of potential side effects ranging from the uncomfortable to the dangerous. Excess demand for the drugs have led to shortages, which impacts diabetes treatments. Well, the drugs have been misused by some people seeking a quick summer slim down at the risk of harming themselves. And there have been reports of substantial weight regain once people quit the treatment. In this episode, we'll look at the issues from different perspectives, and I'll reveal my own decision on whether or not to use weight loss drugs. Well, my first guest is Johan Hari, a British journalist and author who lost 42 pounds, almost 20 kilos, using Ozempic and Wegovy. He shared his experiences, both good and bad, in his best-selling book, Magic Pill, the extraordinary benefits and disturbing risks of the new weight loss drugs. Johan, thanks for joining us. Now, most of us first heard about Ozempic as this kind of Hollywood drug, the Hollywood set using it to lose weight. Tell me about your story, how you got introduced to it.
I remember so clearly the moment that I learned about the existence of these drugs and how I felt. It was that moment when the pandemic was ending. It was the winter of 2022. And the world was opening up again. And I got invited to a party and I was like, oh yeah, I remember parties, they used to exist. So I agreed to go. And in the Uber on the way there, so this party was thrown by an Oscar-winning actor. I'm not saying they're just a name drop, it's relevant to what comes next. But, and I suddenly felt this kind of wave of self-consciousness, right? I was quite fat at the start of the pandemic and I gained a lot of weight during the pandemic. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a bit embarrassing. And then I remembered that like almost everyone I knew had gained weight during the pandemic. And I suddenly thought, actually, this party is going to be really interesting. I'm going to see a load of like Hollywood stars with a bit of flab on them. This is going to be fascinating. And I arrived and I started walking around and it was the weirdest thing. Not only had they not gained any weight, everyone was gaunt. Like everyone was markedly thinner, and not just the actors, their wives, their agents, the agents' kids, like everyone. And I bumped into a friend of mine on the dance floor and I said to her, wow, looks like everyone really did take up Pilates during lockdown. And she laughed at me and I didn't know why she was laughing. And she pulled up on her phone an image of an Ozempic pen. And I learned then and in the following days that there's been a staggering scientific breakthrough. We now have a new kind of weight loss drug that really does deliver huge amounts of weight loss. The average person taking Ozempic Wegovy loses 15% of their body weight in a year. With Mounjaro, it's 21% of their body weight. And I immediately thought two just completely conflicting things. The first thing I thought was, well, this could save my life. I was about to turn 44, which is the age my grandfather was when he died of a heart attack. Loads of the men in my family get fat, die of heart disease. I knew that obesity causes over 200 medical conditions. But I also thought, this sounds way too good to be true, right? Come on now, can there really be such a thing as a free lunch, right? I guess with Ozempic, it'd be a smaller free lunch. So I used my training in the social sciences at Cambridge University to go on a big journey all over the world to interview the leading experts on these drugs, biggest defenders, the biggest critics, and really figure out what this extraordinary revolution is going to mean for all of us. And that's really the heart of my book, Magic Pill.
So, I mean, tell me about those immediate effects on your body. What actually started to happen? How you started to feel it?
I thought if I'm going to investigate this and write about it, I've got to take these drugs. And again, it was the weirdest thing. I remember it's the second day after I started taking Ozempic. I went to a diner just up the street from where I live when I'm in London. And I went in and I ordered what I used to order for breakfast every morning, which I'm slightly embarrassed to repeat, was a huge chicken roll with loads of mayonnaise in it. And normally I would wolf that down and I would still want some potato chips or something else. And I had like 3 or 4 mouthfuls and I was just full. I didn't want to eat anymore. I was completely baffled, and that was really how it was from then on. I felt really full, really fast. So the way these drugs work is they boost your sense of fullness. I can explain the kind of biological mechanisms more. There's a big debate about them, obviously. But they massively boost your sense of fullness. So it's not like dieting where you're like, which obviously I tried many times in my life, where you're sort of hungry and you learn how to deny yourself. It's not like that. You don't actually want to eat very much. It's a very strange feeling.
Let me ask you about that, because you said it happened within a couple of days. Now, I know other people who are taking it, they've gone under medical supervision and so on, but they actually took weeks to start to feel the effects. And you say you felt it within days.
Yeah, different people, you're right. Different people it kicks in, take a bit longer for some people than it did for me. It happened very quickly. Some people it's almost immediate and some people it takes a couple of weeks. But it has a massive effect on the appetite of everyone who takes it. What's interesting is we know some of what's going on why. So if you ate something now, doesn't matter what it is, after a little while, your pancreas will produce a hormone called GLP-1. GLP-1 is basically part of your body's natural signals saying, hey, you've had enough, stop eating. It's the brakes, basically. But natural GLP-1 only stays around in your system for a few minutes and then it's washed away. What these drugs do is they inject you with an artificial copy of GLP-1 that instead of sticking around for a few minutes, stays around in your system for a whole week. So it has this effect that when you start to eat, you already feel quite full because you're getting this signal, hey, you've had enough, stop.
I wonder, now obviously when you're feeling full so much more quickly, do you tend to miss the joy of eating food? Do you find that, you don't find that social pleasure that you discussed?
It's a really important question. And I want to answer it by being honest that I'm unusual. So lots of people taking these new weight loss drugs have the experience that you're describing. It's very widespread. They they lose the pleasure of food. Indeed, Jens Jules Holst, who's one of the scientists who designed these drugs for Novo Nordisk, said this is just going to, make these drugs untenable in the long term. You can't live if you don't enjoy food. I had the opposite effect. So for me, from when I was a very small child, I realized now looking back on it, I grew up in a very violent and stressful environment. I really, from a very young age, learned to use food to calm myself down. And so I would eat, all my life I've eaten very quickly. And it wasn't really for enjoying the flavor or the taste, it was sort of stuffing myself, right? And stuffing is where you deliberately eat beyond the point of feeling full. We've all done it at some point, And I couldn't do that when I was on these drugs. I literally couldn't do it. So for me, I actually had to slow down my eating. And for me, that actually meant that I started to enjoy eating more. I don't want to overstate it. I'm not some great foodie. But for me, it's actually increased the amount of pleasure that I take in food. But I stress, I do think I'm unusual.
You did indicate, you like a lot of the comfort food, the kind of fried chicken and stuff like that. Now, I wonder, though, has that limitation on how much you can eat changed the kind of foods you eat to give yourself something more delicate, perhaps, or something that is less kind of that type of comfort food?
It's an important question, and I started to think about this because half of Americans now want to take these drugs, right? People watching, you might think, they haven't arrived here yet. This is about to transform the society in which you live, right? Obesity is, by many measures, the biggest killer in the developed world. We now have a drug that reverses obesity. It's a staggering breakthrough. It'll be as significant a breakthrough as the contraceptive pill or antidepressants. This is a really, really big moment. And when I learned these statistics, looking at the evidence for how many people want to take these drugs, thinking, at first glance, this seems almost crazy. How did we get to this point, right? How did we get to the point where half of us want to drug ourselves to stop us eating so much? It seems so odd. And if you want to think about that, I think the answer to your question, really important question you've asked, lies there. Because I would just say to everyone, right? Everyone watching, just do me a favor. Just take out your phone and Google something for me. Just Google, wherever you live, Google photographs of beaches in the place where you lived in 1979, the year that I was born, and just look at them on the internet for a moment, right? If you've done that, you would have noticed something really weird. When you look at, for example, as you can tell from my weird Downton Abbey accent and yours, we're British. If I Google pictures of British beaches in 1979, they look like a different country. Almost everyone is what we would now call skinny or in fact quite ripped, right? You think, this is weird. What happened? So between the year I was born and I'm now 45, obesity in Britain rose from 6% of the population to 27% of the population. In the world more generally, in my lifetime, obesity has more than trebled, right? What happened? Why? It's because of the food you're asking about. So we know the answer to this, and obviously this is a process that's happened even more recently in many of the countries that people are watching from. So this transformation, this explosion in obesity, you've got basically 300,000 years human beings exist, and obesity happens sometimes, but it's unbelievably rare. And then essentially in your lifetime and mine, it blows up. And we know why. It happens in every country that makes one change. It's where people move from mostly eating fresh whole foods they prepared on the day to mostly eating processed and ultra-processed foods, which means foods that are built in factories out of chemicals in a process that isn't even called cooking, it's called manufacturing food. And it turns out that kind of food affects our bodies in a really different way to the old kind of food. There's an experiment that really helped me to understand this. It was done by a scientist I interviewed called Dr. Paul Kenny, who's the head of neuroscience at Mount Sinai in New York. I've nicknamed this experiment Cheesecake Park. It's not the official name. Very simple experiment. He got a load of rats and he raised them in a cage. And all they had was the kind of natural whole foods that rats evolved to eat over thousands of years. And when that's all they had, the rats would eat when they were hungry and they would stop when they were full. They seemed to have some natural way of knowing when they were full, and they just stopped eating. So the rats never became fat when they had the natural food they evolved for. Then Dr. Kenny introduced the rats to the American diet. He bought a load of cheesecake, he bought a load of Snickers bars, he fried up some bacon, and he put it in the cage, and the rats went crazy for the American diet. They ate and ate and ate and ate. The way he put it to me is within a couple of days, they were different animals. And quite rapidly, they were all severely obese. Then Dr. Kenny tweaked the experiment again in a way that feels a bit cruel to me as a former KFC addict. He took away the American diet and left them with nothing but the healthy food again. And he was sure he knew what would happen. He thought they would eat more of the healthy food than they had at the start. And that would prove that, eating this food expands the number of calories you eat in a day. That is not what happened. What happened was much weirder. Once they'd had the American diet and it was taken away, the rats refused to eat at all. It was like they no longer recognized the healthy food as food. It was only when they were literally starving to death that they went back to it. Now, I would argue we are all living in a version of that experiment right now, right? We're all living in an environment where the food we're eating, this very unnatural food that your grandparents never had one mouthful of, my grandparents never had one mouthful of, it didn't exist then, profoundly undermines our ability to feel full. And what these drugs do is they give you back your sense of fullness, but of course at a cost, with a risk.
What's interesting is that there are a lot of factors, of course, and you touched on some of those. People don't eat at home now. They don't cook in the way they used to. Every street, certainly in parts of Britain where I go now, it seems like there's, fast food shops, kebab shops and everything all along the street. So people are grabbing that quick fix. They don't seem to have the time for it either. But I wonder, in this case with the drug, for many people, it's more a kind of a target, a project. I'll get down to my ideal weight and then I can start to adjust my lifestyle and so on and so forth. You've continued with the drug. Presumably you see it as something you're going to do for life. Is that correct?
So you've asked a really important question, and the answer is complicated. So what the drug companies say is these drugs work as long as you take them, and when you stop taking them, they stop working. We know, for example, blood pressure medication, right, or statins, they're not a cure, but they treat the problem, and then when you stop taking them, the problem comes back. The drug companies argue these drugs are like that, and they have produced some scientific research that seems to back that up. So they've done a very small amount of research into it, but the studies they've done indicate when people stop taking the drug, the vast majority of them regained the vast majority of the weight they'd lost within a year. Now, obviously, we want to be a little bit skeptical of that because the drug companies have a vested interest in getting us to continue buying them forever. Anecdotally, there are some people, I know some of them, who are saying, look, I took the drug, I used it to interrupt my eating habits and change. Now I've stopped and I'm remaining at a lower weight. There's no scientific evidence to back that up yet. I don't know, but I suspect the drug companies are right. We'll know a lot more in the next few years because, of course, we'll have lots of people who try both models, right? But for me, the decision, and there are lots of people, anyone who's thinking about taking these drugs, the truth is you have to weigh two kinds of risk. There's the risk of taking these drugs. There are significant risks. And there's the risk of continuing to be obese, right? Now, if you're not obese, don't take the drugs, right? Because you're getting all the risk without the health benefit. If you are obese, try the other methods first. There's much less risk from diet and exercise than there is from these drugs. So of course, try that. But I doubt there's a single fat person watching who's never tried a diet, right? Sadly, most diets fail. Not all, but most. So you've got to weigh these two risks. The risk of the drugs, the risk of being obese. And I've got to be honest with you, I'm slightly embarrassed to say this as well. The thing that most shocked me in the research for my book, Magic Pill, was learning the science of just how bad for you obesity is. Everything we fear medically, pretty much, is made more likely by being obese. You're much more likely to get cancer. You're much more likely to get dementia. You're much more likely to get a stroke, which is the thing doctors most fear getting because it's awful. You're much more likely to have a heart attack. For me personally, given that there was such a history of heart disease in my family, and given that we know people who take these drugs, there's very good research now showing this, if you take these drugs and you started with a BMI higher than 27, as I did, in the 2 years that follow, you are 20% less likely to have a heart attack or stroke. That's huge. That's a huge decrease in risk. And there's more and more evidence emerging of health benefits as well as I say, risks. So for me, that was the thing that sealed it, right? I loads of the men in my family get heart attacks. My dad had a heart attack. My uncle died of a heart attack. My grandfather died of a heart attack. I'm now older than he ever was, as I mentioned. So for me, that was decisive. But other people will look at the risks that I go through in Magic Pill and come to a different conclusion for them. I think we have to think about this in a very personalized way. People need to go down the risks and benefits for themselves.
I think that's a very important point too as well, Johan. You actually, instead of just taking the injection like many people do and getting on with their lives saying, look, it's going to work for me, you really investigated it deeply. You wrote about it with Magic Pill, and you've weighed up all the sides. So I guess people that way at least have reference points, which a lot of the time they don't, because they get caught up with the fad of it.
I think that's very true. I would also just stress I'm not a doctor, so people should certainly talk to their doctors. And I obviously don't speak for the drug companies involved. I think you're right that the kind of fad element of this. So I would draw a distinction between a few sets of people. There are people who are overweight or obese who are taking these drugs to get down to be a healthy weight. Now, there's significant risks associated with that, as we've said, but I think there's a strong case for that. And the more obese you are, the stronger the case for it is, because the worse your obesity is, the worse the dangers to your health. Then there's, of course, people, a totally separate category, people who have type 2 diabetes, because these drugs also treat that problem, who obviously have a very strong case for taking it. Then you've got people who are neither diabetic nor overweight or obese, who are taking it to actually be super skinny, right? For example, I was on a recent TV show with one of the Real Housewives of New Jersey who said, we're all taking it. And of course, none of them were fat at the start. They were all already skinny. Now, look, women are made to feel terrible about their bodies, whatever they do. I'm not judging or criticizing those women. That they're put in an intolerable position. But I would strongly urge, based on the scientists I've interviewed and the evidence I've learned, people who are already healthy weight or skinny to not take these drugs for lots of reasons, but I'll just give you one of many. So there are health risks to being too thin. For example, a very important marker of health, particularly as you age, is muscle mass. So muscle mass is the total amount of soft tissue in your body. It's really important for getting out of a chair, walking up the stairs. It's crucial for movement. And when you take these drugs, or when you lose weight in any way, you generally don't just lose fat mass, you lose muscle mass, right? That won't be a problem when you're 35, 40, even 50. But as you get older, we naturally shed muscle mass every year, starting when you're 25, which I find incredibly depressing. But so you naturally shed muscle mass every year. If you're going into the aging process with already very artificially low levels of muscle mass because you're too skinny, you're much more likely when you're in your 60s, 70s, and 80s to be really quite debilitated, to really struggle to get out of a chair, to climb the stairs, to be able to move properly. It's a condition called sarcopenia, which happens as people age, but you're really increasing the odds of that. And that's just one of the many health risks that you're taking on. So yeah, I really urge people to not do that.
And presumably, Johan, you have to make sure that limited amount of food that you do eat under the influence of these kind of drugs has to be nutritious enough to fill the gap with all the kind of essentials, minerals, vitamins, and so on.
It's a super important point. One of the 12 risks of these drugs that I talk about, and they range quite widely from, and I stress again, weighing against the massive, massive benefits of this incredible new breakthrough. But if we think about the risks, they range from, some scientists argue these drugs may be increasing the risk of thyroid cancer, though some others highly dispute that. Eating disorders, and exactly as you say, one of the 12 risks is malnutrition, right? For example, a close relative of mine is taking these drugs and just was taking such a high dose, she just didn't eat. She was really, her kids were having to remind her to eat every day. That's obvious, and a lot of people I think are taking very high doses of these drugs. So yeah, that's a really big way. I mean, this is slightly over the top, the way I'm going to put this. But the way I think of these drugs is they're a tool like fire. They're just such a powerful tool. And fire is a great tool if I use it to warm up my house. And it's a really terrible tool if I use it to burn down your house. And this breakthrough we've made is so powerful, a drug that really can transform your relationship with food and your body, that's going to have positive and negative effects. You know, the book is called Magic Pill because there's 3 ways these drugs could be magic. The first is the most obvious. They could just solve the problem of obesity, right? And I've got to be honest with you, there are days when it feels like that. My whole life, I've massively overeaten. And now once a week, I do a tiny little injection into my leg, barely feel it. I don't overeat anymore. I've lost 15% of my body weight, more I think now. Staggering. The second way it could be magic is more worrying. It could be like a magic trick. It could be like a magician who shows you a card trick while he picks your pocket, right? It could be that over time, the 12 significant risks associated with these drugs outweigh the benefits. I don't think that's the most likely scenario, but it's certainly possible. The third way it could be magic is I actually think the most likely. Think about the stories of magic that we all grew up with. Think about like, what would be a good example? Aladdin, right? You find the lamp, you rub it, the genie appears, the genie grants your wish, and your wish comes true, but never quite in the way you expected, right? There's always some unpredictable effects. And I think we're already seeing that with wave of eating disorders in the United States. But, you know, it'll have a massive economic effect apart from anything else. You know, Dunkin' Donuts and Krispy Kreme were having their stock tank, right? Because so many Americans are taking these drugs. There was a big report by Jefferies Financial for the airlines in the US saying they're going to have to spend a lot less money on jet fuel pretty soon because the population's about to get so much thinner, and obviously it takes more jet fuel to fly heavier people. So there's a whole series of huge and unpredictable cascading effects on the economy, on our health, on how we feel about ourselves that are going to happen as the result of these drugs. And I hope my book gives people an opportunity to kind of take a beat and think through what this staggering transformation is going to mean for all of us.
Now, important point, you called your book Magic Pill, and in that respect, there was a time perhaps when people would see someone fit, you know, out there, and they could tell they'd been working out, they'd been exercising hard. Now we have the magic pill, as you put it. Did anyone ever make you feel like you were cheating by using this to lose weight?
They didn't have to. I felt it myself. And I really thought a lot about this. I thought, God, I really feel like I'm cheating. And that's weird. Like, one of my best friends takes statins for his, to cholesterol. And I've never once looked at him and gone, you cheat, getting ahead of me when it comes to cholesterol. Never crossed my mind, right? This really odd one. And I looked a lot at the history of how we think about being fat, being obese. And if you go right back to, if you look at the history of this, you know, look, for example, in the 6th century, the Pope Gregory I, described gluttony as one of the 7 deadly sins, right? It's always depicted with some really fat person stuffing their face, right? And I've been that fat person. It's very deep in Western culture and many cultures, the idea that being fat is a sin. And you can see that because what are the kinds of weight loss that we admire, right? They're ones that follow the kind of classic Christian idea of like, you've sinned, you get punished, and then we forgive you, right? So like, if someone goes through some horrendous diet and we really see them suffer and they do really extreme forms of exercise, we're like, okay, we forgive you, right? But in a way, I think one of the reasons I felt like I was cheating is it was almost too easy, right? It didn't require any effort at all. I didn't have to suffer. It's like, oh, so I sinned by being fat, but then I kind of got out of jail free, right? But you only have to hear me say that to realize, I hope we can move on from the ideas of a 6th century Pope, right? Because the truth is, obesity has exploded all over the world. And it's not because we're sinners. It's because there's been a transformation in the food supply system that's made us really sick, right? And that's not your fault. That's not my fault. That's not the fault of anyone watching this. That's a big structural change that was done to us. More 3-year-old children know what the McDonald's M means than know their own last name in the United States, right? You didn't choose this, right? This has been done to us. And I think if we can get out of seeing it as a sin and a competition and a race, and more that we're all in this boat together and we've got a shared problem, and part of the solution, I believe, will come from these drugs. Part of the solution will come from changing our culture so we don't allow our kids to be screwed up in this way. And I went to Japan where they have almost no obesity at all and I saw how they've done that. They've not allowed that to be done to their children and to themselves. But yes, I think we've got to have more grown up and mature ways of thinking about this. But, those ideas are in all of us. No one should be shamed for having those ideas. They're deep in our culture. But I do think these drugs give us an opportunity to move beyond them.
Johan, well done for actually documenting all this in your book, Magic Pill, because I think for a lot of people, this is going to be an important guide. It really has gone crazy in terms of even shortages of the drugs, as you well know. So I'm sure we'll have a chance to chat again. But thank you very much for taking the time out.
Oh, you asked great questions. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you. There are millions of people around the world who've had a positive experience with weight loss injections and plenty of others who've experienced unpleasant or dangerous side effects. But there's another aspect to these quick cures which concerns public health experts, and that's the effect they're having on people's attitudes to fitness, well-being and body image. To discuss that, I'm joined now by Professor Devi Sridhar, who is Chair of Global Public Health at the University of Edinburgh, and she's also a personal trainer. Professor Devi Sridhar, thank you very much for joining the show. Now, we'll discuss the benefits of exercise and a healthy diet in just a moment, but I'd like to start by asking you, how bad is the global problem of obesity, and why is it increasing in so many parts of the world?
Yeah, so obesity is a huge health challenge, and in some countries, the number one health challenge. And the reason is it's because it's linked to a number of chronic diseases like heart disease, cancers, stroke, major problems for most healthcare systems. And also it's increasing in all parts of the world. So it's not just in the United States or Britain, Europe, kind of places we traditionally think of having kind of high income problems. This is something that's also a problem now across Africa, Asia, Australasia, Middle East. And so it's truly like a global tide engulfing the world.
Now, perhaps to use the wrong phrase, but how much appetite is there among governments to perhaps limit people's intake of unhealthy processed foods?
This has been a really tricky topic because it has to do actually with the cost of food as well. Ultra processed foods, cheaper foods, think of fast foods, are generally cheaper. They're easily able to buy. They don't go off, and you have a huge private sector behind them supporting them. It is much easier to bring those to market and to distribute them compared to healthier options like fruits, vegetables, grains, meats, dairies, all that kind of more natural sources of food. And so I think here it is a real challenge for governments because they're dealing with this rising market that people want to have. And it's how do you do that in a way where people still feel like they have the options to eat what they want to eat, that it's affordable, but also trying to redirect their populations towards dealing with this weight challenge.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Is it a matter of education or regulation?
Well, it's really tricky because if you just go down the route of awareness, which is of course important, you miss out the socioeconomic gradient, which is what you see with obesity. So take Scotland, where I'm based. If you look at the wealthiest neighborhoods, you don't find many children who are obese. If you go to the poorer areas, you will find rates of 50 to 60% of children who are obese. It's led the head of the Royal College of Pediatrics to say that child obesity is actually a marker of child poverty because children are not being able to eat healthier options. And so I think here, just focusing on education neglects actually the structural forces of why is it that we do see higher obesity rates in lower socioeconomic groups.
So then to what degree have quick fix drugs such as Ozempic, Wegovy and Mounjaro kind of limited or diverted the attention from actually getting to the root causes of obesity?
Well, it's worth saying that these drugs were developed actually for a really important medical use, which is for people who have type 2 diabetes or who are pre-diabetic, whose body struggles to produce insulin, and these drugs can help trigger that. So actually, they do have really important clinical uses to try to help people who are suffering from those conditions. I think the challenge is thinking it's a quick fix for your entire population beyond the immediate issue of cost. I mean, the drugs are expensive. In the States, it can be upwards of $1,000 a month. In Britain, it's been brought down to £100 a month, but then you can't easily get it because there are shortages. It is the issue of actually, is this the right solution for the majority of people? Or should we keep this drug for those where doctors say it is medically necessary and helpful, and that is a small segment of your population? That's not everybody.
And of course, it became kind of popularized with Hollywood stars, using it as a way to change their body image. And I wonder, has that fascination with body image always been with us, or is it increasingly becoming an obsession?
Well, I think there's always been this obsession with wanting to be a certain size or look a certain way or be a certain weight. And that kind of takes away from what we actually want to get to with health, which is how can your body be in the healthiest state so you avoid disease, illness, and pain? And that actually comes through eating a healthy diet, not because you're reaching a certain weight, but actually because that gives your body nutrients, energy sources, different types of minerals, vitamins that help your body stay healthy. And same with exercise. Exercise isn't a punishment to lose weight. It actually is a way to move blood around your body to keep your heart strong, your lungs and organs staying healthy, and to stay independent, especially as you get older. So I think that kind of larger message of actually health being about fitness and being independent and being strong has been lost in the idea of just, try to lose weight and reach a certain size.
Now, Professor, why are women and girls particularly vulnerable? And how dangerous is it to go through this kind of quick weight loss if one isn't really overweight in the first place?
Yes, it is quite dangerous because, for example, here in Britain, people are getting the drugs through online pharmacies or even from friends, taking it and ending up in hospital and A&E with very severe side effects. And this is because it is not meant to be a drug for a quick weight loss. It is not meant to be for people who are within a healthy weight and don't have a medical condition. There are specific groups it can be really helpful for, but I think people saying, oh, I want to lose, 15 pounds, 30 pounds, I'm just going to take this. They are neglecting the severe side effects that can come with it, which is why we are now seeing doctors coming out with warnings saying this is not just a mild drug or a quick fix. This is actually a medication that can be given under medical supervision for specific conditions where it can help.
And you mentioned there are shortages of it now because of this rapid demand. And I'm wondering what governments and the medical community are doing to try to make sure the drug only gets to those who really need it.
Well, it is really tricky, right? Because in the end now, especially with the internet, people can access drugs and go on and order them. But for example, here in Britain, because of those shortages, the NHS has said we have to have the drug for the people who actually really need it, people who have type 2 diabetes or other metabolic syndrome conditions who need this drug to be able to, live their life in a healthy way. And so they are trying to limit people being able just to purchase it legally. But of course, then people are going online and finding other ways of accessing it. So my message is, more to someone, if you're in a healthy weight range, you're thinking, oh, this is a quick way I can, get a beach body or whatever you might want to get. It's not the drug to go to. This is not the route to take. This is a medication that should be a doctor saying to you, this is a good thing to do. And it is really helpful. It has helped, quite a number, it has helped quite a few individuals be able to lose weight or be able to manage their diabetes. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. This is a good drug, but it is medicine and it is not without side effects and consequences.
Well, I read in your article where you refer to that term beach body. You ask, what does that mean anyway?
Yeah, and I think this comes back to kind of social media. You raise that young girls and women are exposed to this. If you do go on Instagram or TikTok, you're just constantly exposed to fitness influencers or models showcasing, their six-pack or their abs or how you're supposed to look in a certain outfit. And it can make you feel really low about how you look. You think, I don't look like that. How can I look like that? But that for me is what I call a commercialized FOMO. It's basically saying to you, oh, if you only bought this product or if you had this, you'd feel better about yourself like I do, the influencer who's trying to show you this. So I think it's kind of just recognizing that actually it's not real. This is not depicting health and well-being in its fullest form. And that actually a beach body is whatever body you have. And if you can get to a beach and walk on it or run with your dogs or chase your grandkids, that's a beach body and a healthy beach body and what you want to be doing with your body rather than looking a certain way that you see online.
You did touch on it a little bit earlier, but what are the biggest benefits? Let's go over them of exercise and diet that people are missing out on when they actually sign up for weight loss medicine like this.
Yeah, so for example, exercise has a number of benefits that have nothing to do with weight loss. So for example, cardio, that's when you go running or jogging or walking and your heart rate goes up and you start to sweat. That flow of blood around your body actually improves your heart function, your organs. It actually gets your muscles energized. So that's one big function of cardio exercise. Then you think of resistance training that's doing push-ups or deadlifts or even, carrying something in the grocery store home. That works your muscles, which means that your muscles that you need to continue to stay independent and keeps you out of a care home in later life, or keeps you being able to live without needing someone helping you. So, and there's flexibility, which is people think of yoga or Pilates, but just stretching out. That's a great way to avoid chronic pain and tight parts of your body, which all of a sudden start to result in that chronic pain and that dull sensation you might get when you sit and you think, oh, my back's really hurting. That is linked to flexibility. So I guess the point being that these kind of components of exercise are useful in and of themselves. Losing weight's a byproduct. And usually it happens because you're moving your body and then we expend calories. But just losing the weight without doing the exercise means you're not getting those benefits that come with physical activity and movement.
From your studies, from what you know, are people actually turning their backs on exercise and a better diet because of the availability of these kind of drugs?
I think that what we are seeing has been a quick fix, people wanting to quickly lose weight, seeing these studies. And there are studies showing that Ozempic does work. It does lead to weight loss in studies more than if you just exercise and eat well, and being attracted to that and thinking that's an easier path for me. So I think coming back to education and awareness, it's just getting that message out that it's more complicated than that actually there are side effects, and that if you're in already kind of a healthy weight range and you don't have, any signs of early diabetes, it's not the right path for you, and that other paths will be better, even if they're not as quick or as simple at face value.
Now, there have been documentaries on it, articles on it, that it seems Japan pretty much leads the world when it comes to healthy diet and healthy lifestyle. How do they achieve it? What can we learn from the Japanese?
There's a lot to be learned from the Japanese, starting from their approach to how they eat. They eat a range of whole foods, vegetables, fish. They have not been faced with the same kind of fast food, ultra-processed food wave that other countries have faced. There's also, if you look at the islands of Okinawa, which have the largest, I think, number of people who live past 100, one key thing is they don't eat past being 80% full. So it means not eating to the point where you feel, oh, wow, I'm really full and I can't eat another bite. They actually stop before that. I think it's just a range of a healthier lifestyle in terms of eating in a diverse range of whole food sources, fruits and vegetables, fish, but also not overeating, eating to a certain level and then stopping and saying, I've had enough for right now. Tied to that, our energy needs go down as we age. And so as we get older, we do need to eat less, and being attentive to that and thinking, I can't eat the same way I ate when I was 30, when I'm 40, or when I'm 60, or when I'm 80. It's a painful message, but it is true biologically that we just need fewer calories to maintain our body as we get older. And so that is also something I think the Japanese have been attentive to, that they do reduce their energy intake as aging, alongside aging.
And I guess there's a cultural element, because for people like me growing up, in the 60s, 70s, into the 80s, we still ate very much at home. There wasn't a lot of going out and eating and that kind of fast food, but we were still kind of under that culture of clean your plate. Whatever's been on your plate, you have to finish it. And that's a challenge.
Yes, completely. And I think that is something where when you go from places where there's been the idea of food scarcity, appreciation for food, not wasting, and then all of a sudden you move in towards a climate where we have an abundance of calories, an abundance of food, an abundance of, cheap calories in the form of crisps or chocolates or sweets or sodas, things where you can consume it and in great quantities. We have a real challenge. And that is what we're seeing in a lot of low and middle income countries who are making that transition, where actually all of a sudden people do have options to eat a lot. They have that idea of food scarcity and of appreciation of food, but then it tips into you're in an environment where actually you have too much food. And that's why you're seeing huge rise in obesity rates. And as I mentioned, Ghana, India, places that you wouldn't expect to be facing this. You think more of infectious diseases. Well, actually, the challenge is moving into chronic disease.
Professor, do you tend to think of the people who use drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro as people who are cheating?
Not at all. I don't think so. I think these are medically necessary and they have a very important role to play. I think it is great they've been developed and actually many people are benefiting from them. But I think they have to be given under medical supervision towards those patients who actually need them. I think using as a quick fix for the whole population One is quite dangerous, as I mentioned, the side effects and what you might be seeing in terms of people coming in, with harmful, health consequences. But also then we start to neglect the benefits of actually keeping that message and keeping that policies in place that encourage physical activity and a healthy diet. So I think it's not the message of like, don't take it. It's think about it before you take it and who's actually giving it to you. If it's a friend, don't take it. If it's a doctor and they're saying to you, need it, that's a good reason to take it.
And presumably, it's a good idea to have checks on your health all along the way, even when you're taking it, because of the potential risks.
Completely. And that's why it's under medical supervision to actually be attentive to the side effects. Some people actually can get quite ill from it immediately if it doesn't take to their bodies. Other people can have nausea, headaches, gallbladder problems. And so actually you do want that supervision in place when you're taking the medication. The other thing to mention is that studies have shown that it's a weekly injection, that if you stop taking it, within a year, people in a study regain 2/3 of their weight. So it is something that is not like you can take for a couple months, lose the weight, and then, okay, I'm done. You actually are signing up, if you want to keep that weight off, to having this for the foreseeable future. It is something that needs to be continuously done.
I wonder, Professor, where are we heading with all of this? Because the number of people using these drugs now, or at least trying to get their hands on them, is quite staggering. So are you essentially fighting a losing battle, or do you see a time when this is essentially seen as a fad, using the injections, and that people will kind of gravitate back towards healthy lifestyle, eating and exercise and so on?
So I think what we're seeing right now in terms of the Hollywood celebrities using it, young women taking it who just want to lose a bit more weight, who are already within a healthy weight range, is a fad. And I think when the side effects become more documented, when the long-term effects become more documented, and that cost-benefit balance can be properly assessed, people will say, I don't know if it's worth it. But I also want to say that I think it's great we have these drugs for those who are pre-diabetic, those who have diabetes, those who are severely obese, those who medically have been advised to take it, and they do have an important role to play. And I think they will continue to have that role to play. But it's against that balance over saying this is for everybody versus this is for a small segment of the population who actually do need it. And let's make sure we keep it for them. And for everyone else, let's go back to the basics of move your body, eat well. That will take you a long part of the way.
Professor Devi Sudhar, thank you very much for joining the show.
Thank you.
I've recently begun my own journey using the weight loss drug Ozempic. So it's been fascinating for me to hear what our guests have told us about their experience and perspectives. While preparing for this episode, I've been discussing the issue with my producer, Neil, and he had a lot of questions for me as well as the guests. So we've decided to do something a little different. We're going to turn the tables and have him throw questions to me about my relationship with food and the reasons behind my decision to pursue this solution. Hi, Neil.
Hi, Riz. I was thinking back to when we first worked together, which was about 30 years ago. And in those days, you were quite active. You were involved in martial arts and other pursuits. So my first question is, what happened?
Yeah, that's the question I've been asking myself for the past 30 years or so. I think actually what happened is my lifestyle got busier and busier, and with less of a routine. I was on airplanes a lot more. I was doing over 100 flights a year for, I don't know what, a decade. And a lot of sedentary lifestyle. I realized one thing is my body needs to move. And I gain weight easily if I don't. And so sitting in airplanes and waiting for airplanes to take off and getting to and from airports, it just absolutely killed the lifestyle in terms of routine for exercise and also for just eating habits and time zones. And they say, with lack of sleep and so on, cortisol's pumping through the body, and that's what you see in front of you.
Yeah. So what's been the impact of weight gain on your body?
I think the biggest impact, now I'm starting to feel it as I enter into technically my 7th decade, is the weight on the knees has obviously taken its toll. A little bit of, at this age, most of us get kind of osteoarthritis starting to show, and of course the extra weight doesn't help in terms of joints, and the menisci get damaged. Plus being very active also takes its toll over the years. So skiing very hard and doing the martial arts, added with the weight now, has taken its toll.
So have you tried to address weight gain in the past?
It's very difficult with that kind of peripatetic lifestyle, traveling all the time and not having a routine. I have tried to sort of cut down on certain foods, but You know, I always joke, my background, genetically, you might call it geographically, is half Punjabi, half Gujarati. And I joke that I had the worst of all worlds because I got the Punjabi appetite and the Gujarati sweet tooth. So that's always been a downfall for me, I think, you know. And I think also it was this sense of invulnerability. You know, when I was young, if I gained even a little bit, which was rare because of the activity, I could lose it so easily. And it really was not a problem. And I think this feeling of invulnerability and that constant sense of I'll just do some exercise and I'll lose this the reality kicks in, if you like. And I realize it's a lot harder now.
So what led you down the path towards Ozempic as a potential solution for all this?
Actually, it was, you know, I'm not one to self-medicate. I've got medical sciences in my background, so I'm not one to just say, let's take a jab and fix it. I don't think there is an easy fix, though people are talking about it this way, because ultimately I don't want to be on, you know, a drug like that for the rest of my life. I'm one of those perhaps a bit naive, but I say, let me get to my target weight and then I can try to manage it from there. But that does involve lifestyle changes. And I just, actually, it was a couple of friends who are doctors that recommended it to me. They said, this is a good way to get to that target weight. Now, they didn't really want to discuss whether I'll be stuck on it forever. But let's see. I mean, you know, I'm only just a few weeks into it, and I'm using a very low dose, building up slowly. So it wasn't a kind of let's jab it in there and you know, let's see the weight go. It's not going to be that easy. Yeah.
Well, there's quite an unpleasant list of side effects, aren't there? And I was just wondering, did any of those put you off?
You know, I've been lucky. Generally, my health, touch wood, has been very good, and I respond well to medicine and stuff like that if I ever have to have it, which I rarely ever have. And I think that I've taken the approach that my body's fairly good at handling stuff, so I'm hoping that's not the case for me, that, you know, there will be any issues. But I also do take the advice of monitoring my biometrics once I've been on it for a few weeks to actually find out if there's any potential risk. I will keep an eye on it for sure.
Mm. Well, I know how much you've always enjoyed food, both cooking it for others and particularly eating it yourself. And I was just thinking, how is Riz going to manage not eating this stuff, not savouring the food? Do you think you're going to miss it?
No, I'll have to learn to have smaller portions. I mean, but I'm going to reveal also that, you know, 34 years ago when we first met, you were the one who had hollow legs. You could just pile it all away. And I did, where did all the food go? And it's like, and he hasn't gained even an ounce, you know. I think I will be able to adjust. I already found I'm starting to do that a little bit anyway, not because of the drug, but just generally. I found by fasting regularly, I started doing something called water fasting during COVID, because as one of our guests said, you know, everyone in COVID was just kind of piling on weight from lack of activity. I was locked down for about 5 weeks. I couldn't go anywhere outside my apartment. So I actually started doing water fasting, where 40 hours a week I would have 0 calories. And they call it like a monk fast if it's over 36 hours. And combined with walking, once we could get out, I found the weight just fell off me.
So you were talking about the weight dropping off, but on the other hand, if you quit these kind of weight loss drugs, it's understood that you could gain as much as 2/3 of that weight back on within the first year. So are you in it for the long term?
Well, again, lifestyle adjustment. I mean, I'll be happy to lose just the 1/3 if it stays at that. But I have a theory that I gain weight just from inhaling dust. So I'm not sure how I will cope. But I'm going to try it, and I'm going to try to adjust my lifestyle. I mean, one thing I'm hoping for, and that was, again, a recommendation from the doctors, was, you know, by losing weight, and I'm kind of generally heavy, muscly and heavy, I'd like to think, is that I actually put a lot of weight on my knees, and that's causing the, you know, kind of injuries, if you like, that I've experienced recently. By losing that weight, maybe I can get back into more of an exercise routine which won't take its toll on my knees, and that hopefully will be a positive cycle rather than what has been a negative cycle for me, which is weight gain, not being able to exercise because of the weight on my knees, and so on and so forth. So yeah, maybe that's too much information, but my goal is to try to get fitter.
Now, one of the side effects that people have noticed is a thing called Ozempic face, which effectively, it's not necessarily due to the weight loss drugs. It's part of just losing weight anyway. You lose muscle mass as well. And when that takes effect on the face, you can have this kind of gaunt appearance. So I'm just wondering whether you're going to be able to look forward to a haggard, flappy-faced version of Riz in the weeks ahead.
Well, as you would probably tell people, I'm good at talking a lot, which means my jaw muscles get a lot of exercise, so it's unlikely they'll suffer too much. I've got quite a chubby face anyway, so let's see what happens. I mean, if I do look like I'm going into, skeletal mode, maybe I'll have to start thinking twice.
Well, the great thing, of course, about you being on screen is that the viewers themselves will be able to watch this in process. So let's check in another 3 months or 6 months and see how you're getting on. And good luck with it, Riz.
Yeah, thank you. And my clothes, I'll have a new range, a new wardrobe range, I hope, which is basically my old clothes that I used to fit in. Cheers, Neil.
Cheers, Riz.
I leave you with a final thought. The Danish company Novo Nordisk, which created Ozempic and Wegovy, is now the most valuable business in Europe, with a market capitalization of over $600 billion. That's 50% more than the entire Danish economy. Well, we began this episode with a surprising statistic that 1 billion people on the planet are obese. So let's end with another equally shocking figure. 800 million people on Earth, or 1 in 10, go to bed hungry. While it seems the problem of global obesity is being transformed by drugs which stop people from feeling hungry, the same cannot be said for the problem of true global hunger. The magic pill which achieves that feat seems like a distant dream. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, a deadly Israeli airstrike hits the southern Beirut suburbs. In just a moment, I'll be speaking to the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Walid Phares, for his take on these developments. Hezbollah, meanwhile, says a senior commander by the name of Ibrahim Akil was killed in that Israeli strike in Beirut. And as Israel conducts one of its most intense aerial bombardments on Lebanon, I'll be speaking to retired Major General in the Israeli Defense Forces and former head of the Israeli National Security Council, Giora Eiland. Welcome. We begin in the Lebanese capital, where there was a loud explosion this afternoon in the city's southern suburbs. This happened in an area of Beirut that is known to be a stronghold of Hezbollah, and the Israeli military said that it carried out what it called a targeted strike in that very area. Well, the Israeli military is redirecting its attention to the Lebanese border, where it faces frequent clashes with the militant group Hezbollah. Well, last night, Israel conducted one of its most intense aerial bombardments on Lebanon in the past year, targeting approximately 100 rocket launchers. And then today, Hezbollah said it had fired 140 rockets into northern Israel. That's also backed up by the Israeli military. Well, the Israeli military reported that the rockets came in 3 waves, targeting sites along the border. Well, Hezbollah claimed it targeted several locations with Katyusha rockets, including air defense bases and the headquarters of an Israeli armored brigade, which they said they struck for the very first time. So that's the latest on the ground in southern Lebanon. Our next guest is Fouad Assanyoura, who served as Prime Minister of Lebanon from 2005 to 2009 before handing over to Saad Hariri. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to Al Arabiya News. Israel has said more than once that they're at a new phase in their war. It seems that Lebanon is their focus. Is Lebanon on the brink of a full-scale war with Israel, do you think?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to this speech. And yes, actually, Israel is now making every effort and missing no opportunity in order to expand the war, and to the extent of really repeating what it really did in the past few days of 2 raids that are inhuman and very bloody. And today, actually, they made a third let's say, attempt to kill 1 but at the end, a number of civilians were killed in this operation. Actually, what appears that Israel wants to drag the region into a full-scale war. Effectively, what has been taking place, particularly in the light of the speech that was made by Hassan Nasrallah yesterday, he tried to soften things and keep things in order to really think more. And definitely, everybody will think. But the attempt that was made by Israel today is actually dragging the region into a full-scale war.
You recently said, though, that Lebanon cannot survive another war. I'm quoting you from an article, so do correct me if I'm wrong in saying that. But that would imply that the stakes are extremely high for Lebanon.
Very much so. Actually, if I can remind you that on the 8th of October, on 23, on Sunday, in the morning of Sunday, I made a statement, a public statement, in saying that this operation that was made by Hamas has managed to really bring back the Palestinian cause back onto the table so that the world will try to really respond and try at the same time to find a solution in the implementation of all the resolutions of the United Nations and the Security Council and the Madrid Conference and the Oslo Agreement and the rest of all these agreements which were not finding its way towards implementation. But I mentioned on that day that Lebanon cannot afford to be dragged into such a war because Lebanon is passing through very difficult crises, definitely several ones. And I mentioned at that time five crises. We don't have a president and we cannot really form a new government. We have a real problem, economic problem, and living conditions are bad, very bad. We have the problem of the Syrian refugees, and we do not have a full-scale agreement among the Lebanese to get involved in such a war. There is no agreement and support for this. And at the same time, the fifth cause, because Lebanon does not have the support and the network of let's say the Arab relations and the world relations to support Lebanon as much as we really had in 2006. So on that basis, I said Lebanon cannot afford, and things were really dragging all the way since the 8th of October until now. We are about to close 1 year, and Lebanon is really suffering, and effectively all matters are leading towards very difficult times for Lebanon. And that's why we say that it is very important that something has to be done, whether it is a real pressure that can be made by the United States and by the international community, because every day it seems clear now that Israel is changing its position, and every day they're coming with new conditions for a truce or to end the existing war. So this situation, I think, that is going to really drag the whole region into a major confrontation. God knows what really comes out of it. So something has to be done in the international community. I think the Lebanese government has to really make a real serious stand, and I really commend the intention of the Lebanese Prime Minister to really go to Washington, to New York, in order to really be listened there by the international community in the General Assembly, as well as probably in the Security Council. Something has to be done, and it is enough actually that the United States is giving the Israelis a blank check to really on the basis of defending itself, but actually what it is a license to kill. So this is the situation that we cannot afford anymore things to be done as such. We always hear the United States making lots of noise about really putting an end to this war, but in the real sense of the word, we are finding that it is extending the license to kill to the Israelis. And today, even its response regarding the raid that was made in Dahi in Beirut, again has given the Israelis the right to pursue its attempts to kill some leaders of Hezbollah, which ended up in the killing of civilians, as much as it did in the past few days with this technological attempt that is clearly Israel has been doing things below the belt, as they say.
But were Hezbollah to stop firing rockets across the border into northern Israel, surely Israel would respond and cease returning fire. What do you make of that argument?
Well, actually, I think what Nasrallah has said yesterday is something that they could have built on it, and there is something else actually that the Saudi Arabia has made actually what the Crown Prince has said, Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He said something very important that has to be picked up by the Israelis and picked up by everybody. It has really reconfirmed that it is ready to establish relations with Israel on the basis of the full recognition of the Israelis to have to approve the creation of a new Palestinian state, fully with full authorities as a state, as a sovereign state. So this is something that these messages are being sent to the Israelis, but I think the group of extremists in Israel are not listening, are not trying to really listen. And what we are seeing, I can really use this term. It is because the Netanyahu, he has his own interests actually, but which I can name it to be micro ambitions and macro consequences, in the sense that Netanyahu is trying to avoid the downfall of its government with what are the consequences that might take place, and that's why he's pushing forward like riding a bicycle. If he doesn't really push forward, he will fall. So this is what he is doing. I think something has to be done by the international community and by the Israelis. I think it's enough what has been done by the Arab world and by the Islamic world by stating their commitment to the Arab Peace Initiative that was made by the Arab Summit and actually brought forward by Prince Abdullah at that time, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. So these are the things that one has to really do something about it. If we continue just to listen to nice words by the United States, and knowing that United States is not ready to do anything because the United States is very busy with what is happening now regarding the elections, presidential elections, I think we will end up by leaving things for let's say the interests of Netanyahu to do all what he thinks it is in his interest.
Help us understand how things work in Lebanon. Does Hezbollah listen to politicians and statesmen like you? Does it listen to advice? Or do orders simply come from Tehran and they follow them? So what I'm trying to say is, were people to reason with Hezbollah and try to give constructive advice or construct some sort of shuttle diplomacy between the two sides and prevent this full-scale war from starting in the first place, would they listen in the first place?
Well, what has been going on for the past, let's say, 15 years is that things were left unattended to, in proper words, so that really Lebanon is falling like a prey in the hands of the Iranians, and the Iranians are really forcing things as they find it is in their interest, and Hezbollah is doing the same thing. So instead of actually creating a vacuum by the absence of the, let's say, the Arab world and the international community of not doing much to really help Lebanon. It's not only by trying to really bring people together in order to have the, let's say, the election of a new president, but more than that, it's something that has to be really done in order to support the people who are for the complete sovereignty of the country. So Lebanon at the present time, effectively, it is in the hands and under, let us say, the control of Hezbollah, and in turn under the control of the Iranians. This is something what we had a chance actually to start creating a change in this regard during the elections, and we found out that everybody withdrew and not really help in order to help those who believe in this full sovereignty of the country. There was not a proper help that was extended, and that's really what really happened. So there was a great deal of abstention from participating in the elections that took place in the 222. So we are now showing the mistakes that have been done at that time. Nevertheless, now we are here. What has to be done? I think there is something that has to be done on behalf of the Lebanese government and on behalf of the international community. The Lebanese government, I think I commend what Prime Minister Najib Mikati is doing, to go and to really be listened at the Security Council and the General Assembly of United Nations. And at the same time, something has to be done by the Americans. I cannot really accept what a spokesman on behalf of the American administration saying that Israel has the right to pursue its attempts to really kill some leaders of the Hezbollah, as if they are giving a blank check to Israel to continue attempting to do what it likes. As I can see it now, that this attempt today of this raid that was made by Israel, it is as if Israel is pushing Hezbollah to fall in the abyss. This is something, it's not only Hezbollah, it is falling in the abyss. Lebanon will fall in it, and Israel will fall in it. Because let's go back to see what really happened since October 8 and October 7 of 223. I mean, Israel has killed that many, 42,000 at least, and has injured and incapacitated over 100,000, and has practically raised Gaza to the ground. But what it really resulted now, actually Israel is in a very deep situation, and effectively it cannot really get out of it, no matter what it does. And now they are finding a way of compensating what they could not achieve in Gaza to really do it in Lebanon. Fine. Now, if they want to really attack Lebanon, what will happen? Again, they will get into a very deep crisis in this, because it will end up with more killing and more destruction. And what they have put as an objective for this battle, as they say, to get the Israelis that immigrated from northern Israel to the midst of Israel, I think they will not get back. Things will get worse, and they will have more immigrants or refugees coming from the north of Israel. So it doesn't really achieve more killing does not achieve any result. Killing, let's say, selectively one and more persons will not really get results. It is something that has to be done towards finding a long permanent solution. What Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has said is the right thing, and it falls at the right time by sending this message to the world and to the Israelis and to the American administration, that something has to be done to make these people come back to their senses. As long as they continue what they are doing, we are not moving towards peace. We're moving towards more wars, and to expand, and more killing, and things would go out of control. Particularly if we look at the world situation, what you have a situation that is very shaky and very vulnerable. What's happening in Europe, what's happening in South America, what's happening in South China Sea, and all these are indicators that something wrong is happening. If we are going to leave things as they are, they will getting, let's say, more complicated, and as you can see, what do you call it, connected vessels. Things will get involved here and there and will create problems here and there. It becomes very difficult to put an end to it.
In the event that things do escalate and a war breaks out between Lebanon and between Israel and Hezbollah,
yes.
Is it an inevitability that everyone in Lebanon would rally around Hezbollah and it would be a Lebanon-Israel war, or would it remain somehow or other a hybrid war or directed attacks like the ones we saw today carried out by Israel? Would it remain between these two parties, or would the whole country, would the whole of Lebanon necessarily be implicated?
Well, let me tell you something. As I said, that when Hezbollah made this, let's say, step towards getting involved in this war, there was little people who really were supporting him. Probably I was the first to talk about it, but I mean, many, they expressed their opinion that they are against it. And now people are against it. But if things will get more complicated, definitely people not would come to the rescue of Hezbollah. They want to come to the rescue of Lebanon. They want to defend Lebanon. So this thing, I mean, instead of leaving things to get more complicated, let's put an end to it now and avoid having a full-scale war.
Your government was the first government, I believe, to include representatives from Hezbollah. Just looking back on it, was it a mistake to include them, do you think?
Well, no, I don't think so. That was a step to really attract Hezbollah to become a political party rather than a military party. But I mean, that was the assumption, and that was the thing that should have been done. But actually, things were getting more and more complicated, and definitely the regional attempts to really use Hezbollah as a weapon in the negotiation that was taking place and still taking place between Iran and the United States. So what we are seeing nowadays, again, I mean, part of it appearing fighting the war for Palestine and for Gaza and for Lebanon, but effectively it is a weapon that is used by Hezbollah in order to really for the benefit of Iran. So effectively, by attracting Hezbollah at that time to become, let's say, a political party was a legitimate attempt, and things where, let's say, regional conditions were possible and helpful. And at that time, you see, we were attempting to start talking with Hezbollah to find out ways and means of sorting problems. And what really happened at that time, following several attempts, and several attempts of assassinations and the like that was happening during the second half of 2005 and the first half of 2006, the Israeli invasion against Lebanon has complicated things. Instead of bringing Hezbollah back to become a political party, what has happened is that the other way around. So this is the situation.
And you were Prime Minister.
There is something that one has to see clearly. And go ahead.
Sure, I was going to say, I mean, you were Prime Minister of Lebanon in 2006 during the July war with Israel. And I just wanted to ask you how how it makes you feel to see your country, 20 years on nearly, still rocked by turmoil and held hostage by the actions of Hezbollah and Israel. How does that make you feel?
Definitely very sad. Definitely very sad. I really attempted every effort in order to save Lebanon. And we have done everything in order to come up with the Resolution 1701. But effectively, it was neither implemented by Hezbollah and neither implemented by Israel. This is the situation, you see. One has to really build on a certain achievement to really ascend to another achievement. What has been going on, when we make one achievement, then it happens something to the contrary, and that we descend and into a different abyss. I think that it is very important to really move towards not the side issues. Hezbollah issue is a side issue, but the major issue is to really get the Arab cause away from being swallowed by the Iranians. Iranians are using the Arab cause as a way of improving the negotiating power of the United States and trying to improve and increase their control over several countries in the region. I mean Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. So in order to get rid of this situation, you do not look into the small things, to the side issues. The main issue is there. Instead of leaving things to be used by Iran, you have to save the region from being used by Iran, and then to direct the region towards real full peace. And full peace has to be on the basis of the Arab initiative of 201, the Arab Peace Initiative.
You wrote
this
really
is
great...
what you call it, the way how.
I was just going to say, you wrote a great opinion piece earlier on this year, and in it, I can quote you as saying, the Israelis need to grasp that the best antidote to Iranian expansionism is a two-state solution. And clearly a two-state solution would make Lebanon much safer as well. But after these tragic 12 months in Gaza, the West Bank and Israel, I mean, that solution is looking more distant than perhaps at any time in living memory, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not only saving Lebanon, saving Syria, saving Iraq, and saving Yemen, saving the international trade, saving the international peace. This is the way how to really look at matters, and not to really going into what you call it, the side streets, the alleys. Go to the main road. The main road is there. How to save the region of really finding a real long-term solution, a just solution, and permanent ones. This is the way how to look at things. And I think what has been said by Prince Mohammed bin Salman yesterday is very important and essential to build on it and to really advance on this initiative, rather than wasting our time by this attack and that attack and so on and so forth. Will not lead anywhere. It will complicate the matters, and I've been falling in the trap that was made by the Iranians. It is very important, as long as this trap is continuously being put by the Iranians, we are not going to get out of this by looking at the side streets and side issues and not towards the main issues.
We're coming to the end of this interview. I just want to ask you, I saw a picture of you together with the current Prime Minister, who you've mentioned a number of times, also the former Prime Minister, Tamam Salam. And I just wanted to ask you, do you continue to have an active role in Lebanese politics behind the scenes? And are you giving advice to the current government?
Yes, let me tell you something. I've taken a decision at the end of my term as an MP, after having served for about 10 years as a Minister of Finance, and about 5 years as a Prime Minister, and about 9 years as as a member of the parliament, I took my decision. I'm not pursuing anymore any position, but I am still very active politically, and I am doing every possible effort in order to really assemble efforts and join efforts towards really making a change. I was the one who has suggested the formation of the club of the former prime ministers, and we are meeting periodically, every other weeks at the least, you see, and we continue to exchange views and support whenever it is needed to support, and saying our opinion whenever it is necessary to do so.
This is my last question, and this is for the benefit of people watching who might be thinking, when they read about Lebanese politics, they read about often dramatic events, they read about stalemate, they read about infighting, even assassinations. What would you say is wrong with Lebanese politics?
Yeah. Well, normally in the media, you see, there's a joke. They say it, people of the media, that when a dog bites a man, it is not a news, but when a man bites a dog, that's news. You see, so this is what they say in the media. Well, actually, there is something wrong in Lebanese politics, which is something that I attempted personally in a series of attempts to introduce real reform in the Lebanese politics. One of that, let's say, one of that was really making it a law and to be practiced as such, that appointments in all positions in government offices and in all public sector institutions and the like, in the army and the internal security and so on, based on merit, as what I mean by that, meritocracy. And in this, it solves the problem, a very deep problem in the country, and stops, let's say, the control that is being practiced by the Lebanese politicians and by the various families in order to impose their control over their voters. And that in that respect, every individual in Lebanon finds himself with this system, that whatever he really expects as a service from the government, he cannot take it without really going through his Zaim, his representative in the parliament, and so that he can arrange for him to get his right. So this is something very bad, you see. And I tried this and attempted several times, and in certain aspects I made let's say an important achievement, but later on it was not pursued. So this is one. There's something else that I attempted in the Lebanese parliament, which is something that very important. We have done it during the second half of 2005 in terms of a reform which is based on the constitution, that all the constitutional powers, which is the legislative as well as the executive powers, they are supposed to be hand in hand, independent, and not to make any one steps on the other. So there was some sort of an attempt to have a type of government in Lebanon which is all unity government, which ends up, all unity government is something that happens in all democracies, but for a certain period of time, and at the end of a certain crisis, they go back to real democracy. Democracy, there is a majority and a minority. The advantage of that, the majority really be in government, and the minority is not supposed to be marginalized minority, but it tries to really criticize and try to effect a downfall of the majority. But this is democracy. What I have done in this, in agreement with the Speaker of the House, Nabi Berri, we arranged that we had is something very similar to what really takes place in all major democracies, in the United States, in England, as well in France, which are having what you call it, the Q&A time, weekly meeting, as actually weekly meeting to hold the government accountable. And we managed to have that for a period of about 5 months. But effectively what really happened later on, the speaker decided to stop it, while actually this is a very good, important step towards the implementation of a proper democracy, whereby every week the General Assembly of the Parliament convenes, and any member of the Parliament, he speaks for 3 minutes, not to have long sessions and long speech and to show everybody that he knows how to speak and how to improvise. Actually, what he has a certain question for 3 minutes, and then the government answers. If it doesn't have an answer, they will ask him to really delay it for the second week. And if he doesn't get the right answer, he has the right to question the government, and he has to ask the vote of confidence in the government. This is how to really make the democracy really work. This is something was not done. And I have reminded the Speaker of the House so many times over the past decade, and he says yes, 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 and nothing really happens.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us, Fouad Assaneura, former Prime Minister of Lebanon. Thank you for speaking to Arabiya News.
Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Giora Ireland, who is a retired Major General in the Israel Defense Forces and a former head of the Israeli National Security Council. Thank you so much for joining us, Major General. You've been quite critical of Israel's response to the 7th of October attacks right from the beginning. And I just wanted to start by asking you, what's been at the core of your criticism? Are you saying that Israel was too lenient or too harsh in Gaza?
Neither one. If we understand what really happened on the 7th of October, then the best way to present it would be that on that day, the state of Gaza began a war against Israel. They killed about 1,200 Israelis, most of them were civilians. They did capture or kidnap about 250 Israelis. Again, most of them are civilians. And this was a very vicious and brutal surprise attack. Now, just imagine what would happen if something similar could be in Europe, when the small state of Luxembourg would do something similar to its bigger neighbor, Belgium. We can assume that if it happened in between Belgium and Luxembourg, then the immediate Belgium response would be to cut all the supplies from their area to small Luxembourg and to say, well, at least, we are not going to let any supply going from Belgium to Luxembourg that does not have any access to the sea, and we will do it at least until you return with no conditions all the 250 Belgium citizens that you kidnap. So that's exactly what we should have done on the very first day of that war. And today's war, if we can speak about the 21st century wars, the most important matter is not the military force or the ability to use, let's say, to carry out military strikes. The most important matter is to use the relevant advantage that you have over your opponents, and the real advantage that Israel had and still have over the state of Gaza is that all the entrance and exits to Gaza and from Gaza are fully controlled by Israel. So we should have done something similar to that. And if it happened, we could be long time ago, after the end of the war, with all the Israeli hostages back, with much less Israeli casualties and with much less civilian Palestinian casualties. And this was the core of my criticism at that time.
Okay, so it's principally about the strategy rather than the leniency or the excessive harshness. I want to ask you about something that surfaced on social media in the last 24 hours or so. We've all seen these pictures of IDF soldiers throwing bodies off a roof. I believe that happened in the occupied West Bank. We're not going to show those pictures here on Al Arabiya because they're pretty sickening. But what's your reaction to that? Do we agree that this was a crime?
I don't know. I did not see it. Actually, it's Friday today. Friday, I'm trying not to work. So I'm not sure that I know the story that you're talking about. And anyway, we're focusing on our northern border with Lebanon. So actually, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I cannot respond.
We've had lots of guests on this channel who've said in the last week that they believe that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's principal motivation is simply to stay in power and out of jail. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, usually I prefer, whenever I speak to foreign networks, not to speak about the internal Israeli problems, but to try to explain what we do on the 8 fronts that we are confronting right now. We have 8 fronts that are fighting against Israel. So yes, we do have problems with our leadership. I don't like the way that the Prime Minister behaves. I'm not sure that all his considerations are based on purely national interest. And I do explain many things domestically in Israel, but I prefer to explain, if you want to know what is the real, let's say, problem here during this, let's say, 8 fronts war, rather than to go to, let's say, to internal Israeli politics.
And with regard... Go ahead.
So, with your permission, it is important to understand because most, let's say, reporters and analysts all over the world fail to understand the core of the problem. The core of the problem is a dangerous combination of 2 elements that are not known only an Israeli problem. It is going to be very shortly a problem of the Middle East and maybe also of the West. And this is the 2 elements that actually describe the Iranian strategy. The first one is to take, let's say, weak countries. Some of them are failed countries like Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and others. And they build an internal pro-Iranian militia inside those countries. Those militias get a lot of ammunition and training and money from Iran. So they become stronger and stronger and more influential. So it is like a cancer that spread inside the body of a country. So at some point, the country is actually not able and not accountable for what is happening within the countries, but everything is done according to the pro-Iranian militia. And as I said, you can see a perfect example in Lebanon, a perfect example in Yemen, and partial example in Iraq and Syria. But the Iranians have a very, very big appetite, and they want to see a very similar developments in Jordan, in Sudan, in Bahrain, and at some point maybe also Saudi Arabia and other countries. And in each country, they do find, let's say, a core of opposition that they support strongly in order to make them a very loyal pro-Iranian militia. So this is one element. But in the past 5 years, we could see the second element in this strategy, and this is to arm all those militias with very, very advanced military capabilities. So they are not the terrorist organizations that have an RPG and Kalashnikov. How many countries in the world have a capacity of the Houthis in Yemen? they can launch missiles to a range of 2,000 kilometers. How many countries in the world have such an arsenal like Hezbollah? And similarly, we can speak about Hamas and other militias in the region. So the combination of these two elements will actually break down the structure of the states in the Middle East and will bring a lot of instability, even more than that, first to the Middle East and later to other areas. So Israel is fighting, of course, for itself, but whenever we fight against those militias and against Iran, we are doing a great favor to the West, and this is something that should be, let's say, strongly emphasized.
So you're basically saying that we are heading towards a broader regional conflict. Are you saying that's an inevitability now?
This is, again, this is something that Iran wants, and they said actually almost openly, not to mention that for the past 25 years, the supreme leaders say again and again that his goal, his vision, let's say his legacy is to destroy Israel and to wipe Israel off the map. This is, let's say, clear policy. And the strategy of all those proxies is actually to serve this, this goal. So whenever we speak about Hamas, Hezbollah, and others, and we ask ourselves, what is their, let's say, political goal? Their political goal is to eliminate Israel and to kill all the Jews who live here. It is not about any territorial dispute or any other dispute. So it brings me actually to the main front today, and this is the front in Lebanon or with Lebanon. Just yesterday, we could hear the chairman of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, who said in very clear words, I'm not going to stop this war, I will continue. And as far as he's concerned, he's not really interested to see a total war between his organization and Israel, but he prefers to continue with this kind of attrition war. And in order to give full support to his speech, Hezbollah launched about 140 rockets again against Israeli northern areas only today. So actually, we are at war, not only with Hezbollah on this front, but whenever we speak about this area, the war is actually between the state of Israel and the state of Lebanon, because the state of Lebanon and Hezbollah are actually one entity. And the control of Lebanon is in the hands of Hezbollah. So no matter who has different title, the real leadership, the real, let's say, regime in Lebanon is a regime of Hezbollah that is working openly for the Iranian interest. And this is something that we would expect the West to understand, if not to support.
I mean, Hamas has been severely weakened, hasn't it, by these last 11 months. A lot of analysts saying it can never be completely destroyed. It's an ideology, and you can't destroy an ideology. That's their argument. At what point do you think Israel will say it's achieved as much as it can in Gaza and it's time to end the operation? What would that point be?
Okay, I tend to agree with you for the first time in this interview that one of the ways to try to calm down the situation is to reach a simple deal in Gaza that was based on two simple elements. Number one, a full return of all the Israeli hostages in one step, and in return, a complete cessation of violence and end of the war in Gaza, and a withdrawal of all the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. I agree that this is something that today is probably within the interest of many other parties, not only of Israel. And this is something that I'm not sure that Hamas is interested in such a deal, but this is something that can be done. And there are reconsiderations in Israel whether or not to adopt something like this. I'm not sure that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, will accept it, because yes, of course, he wants to end this war and he wants to stay in power, but unfortunately, he does not feel any real pressure. He does not feel pressure because actually Israel continued to supply his government with about 300, 400 trucks of supply every day, not only with, let's say, elementary food, but also with fruits, fresh fruits, and shampoos and whatever. Number two, this supply is delivered by his own people, by Hamas. So Hamas is perceived by the population as an organization that take care for them, so they don't have any reason to resist and to be, let's say, frustrated. Number three, Hamas gets all this supply for free and he resell it in a very, very high prices to the population. So every day it becomes richer and richer. There are some assessment that from the beginning of the war until now, the profit of Hamas only from this supply reached something like $500 million, which is quite impressive figure. And number four, because he has so much money, it is very simple for him to hire more and more combatants. So I'm not sure that Sinwar will accept such a formula because he does not feel any real pressure. And the military pressure by nature, again, in the wars of the 21st century is limited, and especially it is limited because of the structure of Gaza and mainly the tunnels, hundreds of kilometers of tunnels below the ground that enable the leadership of Hamas to feel quite confident and to continue with his war. Of course, he hopes that there will be escalation on all other fronts, so he would achieve whatever he really dreams of, and this is a total war of all the Arab countries and all the nations around us against us.
Just lastly, this is my last question to you. Back in April, you're quoted as saying in the Times of Israel that the Israeli leadership doesn't listen to the United States. I just want to be clear with you here. Why do you think Israel isn't listening to the United States? And just looking forwards to the election in the United States, do you think Israel is more likely to listen if there's a change, a large change of regime in the White House, a large change of administration, and Donald Trump returns to the White House? Would that change something, do you think, in terms of whether or not Israel is listening to the US?
Unfortunately, from the beginning of this war, and actually from a time that began something like 2 years ago, from the establishment of this current Israeli government, the dialogue between Israel and the United States is poor. It is full with mistrust, misunderstandings, even bold conflicts of, if not of interest, at least of expressions of interest. And we have to be very sorry for that, because one of the elements of the Israeli national security strategy is to have a very, very close and reliable and friendly relations with the United States. And unfortunately, yes, the Israeli Prime Minister made a lot of mistakes along the past 22 years. And actually, we are paying the price for that. Some people say that his real hope is to wait until the election in America. He hopes that Trump would win, and then he would be able maybe to recover the relationship, have better understandings, or even agree to certain things that the United States might say, but he wants to give, let's say, this reward to Trump rather than to Biden and Harris. And I think it is a very, number one, dangerous approach. It is not very ethical one, and it cannot be done if the damage is to the national interest of Israel. So yes, I have a lot of complaints against the way that our government is behaving, but it doesn't necessarily mean that our enemies are the good guys and we are fighting in the wrong way, or we are doing something that we should not do on the battlefield. I think that we are doing whatever we have to do in order to defend our country and our nation. And as I said again, unfortunately, it is not well understood and not well appreciated by the West, although we are, at least indirectly, are serving the interest of the West.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed, retired Major General Giora Eiland. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to Al Arabiya News.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
As tensions between Israel and Lebanon escalate, how are these developments going to impact Jordan and its role in maintaining regional stability, and also the broader implications for Middle Eastern geopolitics? Well, to help us answer those questions is the former Jordanian Minister of the Interior, Hossein Majali. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Jordan's in a really delicate position, isn't it, navigating relations with Israel in the context of what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank. Just how challenging is this for your country?
Good evening, sir. Well, I tell you something, it is extremely challenging because things in the region are volatile, especially in the Gaza region and in the West Bank and on the northern borders or the southern borders of Lebanon. So it is like you're walking on a tightrope. But if you allow me to interject just for half a minute on your on the previous guest that was talking to you, and I'm surprised from a professional military officer to mention the analogy of Luxembourg and Belgium. I would like to ask him that and tell him that Belgium has not occupied Luxembourg for the past 70-some years, and it has not put some part of Luxembourg under full blockade. So, and as for the number of the Israelis lost their lives on the 7th of October, all media reports have said that a good number of them was shot by the IDF themselves. So it's just a correction of this. And I'm surprised from a military officer also to say that he wanted to put Gaza under starvation. And remember, Gaza also lost 41,000 people to date. And this is not a number you take it lightly. So this is my answer just for your previous guest.
Okay, thanks for pointing that out to us. Let's talk about what's happening in Jordan in particular, because the Islamic Action Front, which is affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, became the largest party in parliament when they won about 30 seats. That's out of 138. How is this going to affect Jordan's position with regards to the situation in Gaza? Do you think it will affect it?
I personally, honestly, do not think it will affect very much. First of all, it has, as you've stated, it has 31 seats, which is about 22% of the bloc of the parliament. And when Jordan ratified the peace treaty with the state of Israel, Islamic Brotherhood was in parliament in 1995. So, and they had almost that number, just a bit short of it, in 1%. So I would like to say, definitely the Gaza and the West Bank disturbances and all the operations going there has affected the result of the elections, where I believe it played in favor of the Islamic Action Front, and it gave them that seat, that number of seats. But will they be any? Will they play a major role in like ending the peace treaty or changing the course of the state? Well, the course of the state is really forward going. His Majesty the King has voiced his concern, and he's very forward moving in condemning the Israeli actions in Gaza and in the West Bank. And also remember, the Islamic Front is a member of the Jordanian society. We cannot alienate somebody who has come to the parliament via the ballot. They came via the ballot. You agree with them, you disagree with them, they came via the ballot, and 463,000 people voted for them, voted for the bloc that is on the, not for the 31 because they're split into two. 17 they came on the party of the Action Front, and the other ones on local elections, sir.
So do you think that the war in Gaza was at the forefront of the minds of people as they voted there in Jordan?
The war itself, and more importantly, the everyday results of the aggression, the number of people who've been maimed, the genocide, the inhumane treatment of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. By the way, the West Bankers have not attacked on the 7th of October. They didn't do anything on the 7th of October. So, no, definitely it had the optics, and you know the special relationship between Jordan and Palestine, and occupied Palestine. It is a very strong relationship. There are family ties, there are what we call it is marriages and all this. So it hits home. It hits home. For you, sir, you get affected if something happened in Japan. How about if something happens next door to you and they are your next of kin? This is only a very normal reaction to what is happening. Definitely yes.
Sure, and there have been quite a lot of protests, haven't there, in recent months? People taking to the streets saying that the treaty with Israel that will celebrate 30 years actually next month, they're saying that treaty should be scrapped. I mean, this puts the Jordanian government in a difficult position, doesn't it? How do you think they're likely to react, and could that treaty be in jeopardy?
So first of all, I was the head of the Public Security Directorate, which is in charge of internal security. We had this protest. Very soon we will commemorate 30 years. Those protests have been going on for 30 years. Different times, different peaks, lows of the numbers, but it's been going on all the time. So I personally don't think at all it will affect. I think what will affect the peace treaty is Israel's action in Gaza and in the West Bank.
Jordanian officials have frequently pointed the finger at Iran and said that Iran is perhaps trying to destabilize the kingdom. Do you think there's much evidence of that? And could this be an example of it?
Sir, I personally think, I could be way wrong, but I think nowadays for the past 6 months, Israel has been playing a bigger role in that than we can point at Iran. Definitely Iran has its interest in the region, and Jordan is part of the region, and most of the, let's say, the satellite forces or the proxy forces for Iran, they are around Jordan, and we are the only steady and strong pillar not allowing those proxy groups to penetrate Jordan. And so I am sure that there are actions or doing things to affect Jordan using specifically the northern borders, our northern borders with Syria, to smuggle weapons, drugs, and to try to stabilize the security and peace and tranquility of Jordan. But the Jordan public, the armed forces, the security forces are very vigilant, extremely vigilant on that, and we will not allow. You know, we are not a banana republic. We are a strong kingdom based on laws, based on a very strong social cohesion, and this will not be allowed at all for someone to try and destabilize Jordan. We are one person. We are one country in one person.
The Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said earlier on this week that there is this risk of a war that could involve eventually Jordan, Egypt, the entire region. I'd like to ask for your assessment of those comments and to ask you whether you think Jordan does risk at this stage being dragged into a broader regional conflict.
Well, first of all, Jordan is ready for any scenario. But being honest with you, at the time being, in the current situation, I really do not say. I do not see it. Is it a possible scenario? Definitely it's a possible scenario. Is it going to happen? I think it is a little bit far-fetched, unless His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Turkey, has information, privilege to information that I really personally do not have. But reading the map of the region, I don't see it coming. What I see coming is that the government of Israel, especially the Prime Minister and his 3-4 cronies in the cabinet, they are asking for a bigger war. They're pushing Lebanon to go into a war. And if you noticed in the coming 3-4 days, what has happened, the targeting of Hezbollah, whether by rockets, whether by jet fighters, whether by the pagers, whether by the communication equipment. And your previous guest was very worried about a couple of missiles that were fired from Hezbollah.
So what is your assessment there with regards to the broadening of the conflict as far as Lebanon is concerned? I know you're not in Lebanon, but do you see a broader war, therefore, developing on Israel's northern border with Lebanon and spilling over into the whole of Lebanon? Where would you see that heading?
To be honest with you, I think what the Israelis doing now is an extremely uncalculated risk. They've got an armed forces. They've been against all the doctrines of the Israeli forces. They've been in engagement for the past 11 months plus, 11 months, 10 days, I think. And I don't think they have the manpower, the morale, the determination to enter a full-scale war. But the political leadership, I think, who does not understand very much about military, only probably the Minister of Defense, but the other people have not served in the military. Or if they served in a clerkish capacity. I think they're pushing for an all-out war with Hezbollah. They made a big mistake. And as I said, it's an uncalculated risk they're doing. And before, Hezbollah was isolated. Before the pagers issue and the radio communication issues and the raid on Lebanon proper, not on the southern part of Lebanon. I think they brought every Lebanese backing Hezbollah behind them in protecting Lebanon. Am I naive saying that Lebanon and Hezbollah will prevail over Israel? Definitely not. Israel has the might, has the air power, has the sea power, which none of them has, and has the land power. But Hezbollah owns the land, and they know the land very well. And Hezbollah of 2006 is not the same Hezbollah in 2024. So the rules of the game have changed, and I really pray that both sides become level-headed and not push the area into a higher tension, which could lead to regional disturbances.
So what can the international community do to prevent that very bleak scenario you just described from happening? What needs to be done?
Well, I tell you, I don't think Israel cares to what they do. 3 days ago, there was a vote in the General Assembly where 124 countries have recognized, in favor of Palestine. 14 said nay, and 41 abstained. And there is a lot of pressure on Israel, and Israel is not listening. Israel is not listening to the United States. Israel is not listening to the United States at all. And as you stated earlier with your guest, They're playing a very dangerous game, that they're betting on the results of the elections, and I think they are taking also an uncalculated risk with this one.
So just lastly, would you say that in terms of the diplomatic effort up until now with regards to Gaza and striking a ceasefire deal, there hasn't been a ceasefire since November in Gaza, would you say that the lack of success on that front, and we have seen Secretary of State Blinken go 10 times to the region trying to broker some sort of a deal, but would you say that the lack of success on that front is all down to the fact that the Israelis are not listening to the rest of the world? Is that what you're saying?
First of all, definitely I agree with what you've stated on my behalf, 100% correct. And more importantly, Western world, led by the United States, have many tools to use to pressure Israel, and they have not been using, mainly power, mainly munitions, mainly full supplies of arms, and that they tell you we need to stop. There has to be a cessation of fighting there, and at the same time they're supplying weapons, they're supplying arms, and all that. And I think the US, the West, has the capability to be an honest broker, but a full honest broker. You cannot be a go-between and someone who enforces peace in the region and stability, and being with one party against the other party. I believe the United States can and should do that. The US always held the banner of humanity and peace and stability in the region. And I think if it wants to be the leader of the free world as it preaches, it should start with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us here on Al Arabiya News. The former Jordanian Minister of the Interior, Hossein Majali. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Well, let's bring in our correspondent, Benji Haya, who's standing by for us in Washington this afternoon. Benji, Israel says its focus is shifting from Gaza to the northern border with Lebanon. And in the last few days, we've seen lots of evidence of this new phase in Israel's strategy. Is this worrying Washington, do you think?
It is, and it's led to a change of plans, in fact, even. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was due to go to Israel and indeed many other countries in the region next week. That trip has been cancelled in light of recent events, perhaps unsurprisingly. He was due to sit down with his counterpart, Yoav Gallant, who was the one to declare this new phase of the war, moving towards the border, of course, with Lebanon. And we've seen that most recent exchange of fire between Israel and Hezbollah. It goes to show, I think, that the Biden administration is highly concerned by these events, and it continues to call for a de-escalation. It has expressed these fears and concerns of an escalation in tensions and violence, both publicly. We've seen statements go out towards both parties, but also privately. And even though there wasn't a forewarning from Israel towards the United States regarding the walkie-talkie or the pager attacks in the last couple of days. There was still a brief communication between the Israeli government and the American government, letting the United States know that there would be some operations being conducted. So the US being kept in the loop, but ultimately their hope for that de-escalation of tensions is not coming to bear. We are in fact seeing that violence ramp up in the past 24 hours or so.
A very busy week for the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and in the last 24 hours he's been holding talks with the top diplomats of some allied countries. What are his priorities right now?
Well, just cast your mind back a couple of days to the initial pager attack. Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, was in Egypt. He was holding talks in relation to a possible ceasefire deal that the United States still wants to see signed between Israel and Hamas to end the fighting, at least for now, in Gaza. He has since returned to Europe. He met on Thursday with the French foreign minister and said at the time that he wants all parties, Hamas, Hezbollah, Israel, to maintain restraint and avoid escalation. His officials, the US government more widely, is still pushing for that ceasefire deal, which they see as interconnected with the escalation between Israel and Lebanon, which really ramped up, of course, following the Israel-Gaza war. And the hope, at least from Washington, is that a ceasefire deal would also help to bring down the tensions to the north of Israel. But ultimately, the officials here have made it clear that they do not hold out much hope for a ceasefire deal being signed before the US presidential election this coming November.
OK, we've got the UN General Assembly in New York on Sunday. What can we expect to come out of that?
Well, I think, the presidential election in a couple of weeks will feature very prominently, even though it's not necessarily the United Nations remit. But the fact that Donald Trump has made a number of comments in the past about how hostile he is towards these sort of international bodies, what he sees as their ineffectiveness. At the same time, you have Vice President and the Democratic Party's candidate Kamala Harris perhaps turning up to the summit in New York. So I think that there will be that element that could be potentially overbearing on the events that will be discussed. We see from the agenda that there are a variety of areas that are going to be covered: climate change, nuclear disarmament, the Security Council's effectiveness, the fact that there are powers on there, be it US, be it China, be it Russia, who often veto any sort of resolutions regarding especially the war that we are seeing between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, or indeed Ukraine and Russia. And on Israel, I think this will be a significant moment. Its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is due to be in attendance, and that's significant because his own country, his own state, is facing accusations of genocide by the International Court of Justice. That is a United Nations affiliated body. So I think you can anticipate widespread protests outside and perhaps some questions directed towards the Prime Minister when he attends in New York in a few days' time.
And of course, lastly, with the election still very much in everybody's mind, the Republican candidate Donald Trump spoke yesterday at the Israeli-American Council National Summit. That was in Washington. And he said that Jewish American voters are going to be partly to blame if he loses the election. Is that because he's trailing behind Kamala Harris amongst Jewish voters there in the United States?
Yes, and that's no different, I should say, from previous elections. On the whole, if you look at polling, American Jews, by a vast majority, support Democratic candidates. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, by a ratio of about 70% to 30%, something that Donald Trump clearly feels is unfair towards him. That amongst a series of outlandish, remarkable comments that he made at two different events on Thursday night. One was actually regarding fighting anti anti-Semitism. Yet it was at that event where he made several comments which conflated Jewish people and the actions or the will of the Israeli government, which many people see as an anti-Semitic trope. He claimed that Israel would be, quote, totally annihilated, would be wiped off the face of the earth if he didn't win the presidential election in November. He said that the Democrats, the enemy, as he calls them, support Hamas. And then at that separate event that you mentioned, literally down the road in Washington, he said, quote, and this is something he's mentioned before at his rallies, any Jewish person that votes for Kamala Harris is a fool, he said, and should have their head examined. He also veiled a sort of, he also gave a sort of a veiled threat towards Jews in the room and more widely around the United States when he said that they would be to blame, that they would have lots to do with his defeat if they don't vote for him. As I mentioned, most Jewish people in America are expected to side with Kamala Harris in this election, and those comments that Donald Trump made last night, condemned by Kamala Harris's husband, the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, who is Jewish, and he called those remarks vile and anti-Semitic.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Benji Haya in Washington, thank you for all that. That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us on Monday for more exclusive interviews and debate. Until then, goodbye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
In a journey that is rich in its content and substantiated by its details, from primitive cave drawings to the engraving of letters on stones, it set out. Writing was invented, and the alphabet shortly followed. And is the case in all journeys. What is new is the title. When you are facing a manuscript, it is inevitable that time will simply fleet you as you enter a meditative state. As you wipe the dust off of it, the fragrance of history captivates you. You begin to visualize the very fingertips of those who created this fine craft that they excelled in. The first calligraphers excelled in their precision and artwork skills. They added diacritics, and with ink and tools they wrote it all out, and they decorated them with their motifs. These are the messages of light, passed on through the history of Arab manuscripts. When you are facing a manuscript, it is inevitable that time will simply fleet you as you enter a meditative state. As you wipe the dust off of it, the fragrance of history captivates you. You begin to visualize the very fingertips of those who created this fine craft that they excelled in. When you have the opportunity to handle a manuscript, you'll begin to wonder, how were these papers made? How were all these manuscripts written and duplicated? How did they last long enough to reach us in a state of fine quality, grace, and elegance? They bear the history of the Arabs, preserving their intellectual prowess in all the fields of knowledge. All of this confirms the importance of Arab manuscripts and reflects how skillful and capable ancient Arab manufacturing had become. The manuscript industry was based on four main pillars. The appearance and material the paper was made of was the first and most important pillar, especially paper that was made from papyrus plant, and parchment that was made from animal skin, and paper that was made of linen and hemp. The second of these pillars was the ink and midad that was used, and the various colors that were selected. The third pillar was the pen that was used, which included the associated tools and calligraphy methods that were used. Binding was the fourth and final pillar in the production of an Arab manuscript. Sources make varying claims regarding the kind of paper used in manufacturing manuscripts. It mostly depends on the raw material that the paper was made of. Besides parchment, papyrus was widespread, and it reigned supreme for an extended period of time until paper, or al-kaghid, was invented and was deemed a fierce competitor to them. It reached its zenith in the middle of the 5th century Hijri. It replaced papyrus, and the printing presses that began to use paper were more common and prevalent. The Arabs of the pre-Islamic era and Islam were familiar with papyrus, which was known as al-karatis. As an important material used for writing, it was even mentioned in their poetry. Tarafa bin al-Abd likened the face of his beloved to al-Qurtas from the Levant, as it is white and pure. Their cheek is similar to al-Qurtas from the Levant, and was encrypted like a Yemeni stone that had not been exposed. Papyrus constituted an important leap in the manuscript industry. It led to developments in the authorship and inscribing processes, and also helped spread information across vast distances because of the advantages this paper had. It was light, non-cumbersome to store and transport. The paper could even be transported through the folds of clothing. The papyrus plant would grow abundantly in the swamps of the river delta in ancient times. The ancient Egyptians benefited from it, and it resulted in the development of one of the most important industries, which are considered one of the greatest accomplishments that Egypt had offered human civilization, that being the paper-making industry. From this papyrus plant, paper is made. It is one of the most important agricultural crops that grew in the swamps of the delta in Egypt. And there are various species of it present in Sudan till this very day. They served many purposes in ancient Egypt, which ranged from making boxes, baskets, and ropes, but its core value lies within its use in making paper. Egypt was considered a center for this important industry, and it began to export a large portion of what they produced to the countries of the ancient world. The papyrus plant is from the sedge family of plants that belongs to the cypress genus and the papyrus species. The word paper is derived from papyrus, and it is what we use in the English language. The length of the papyrus plant ranges from 7 to 10 feet, and it is made of a trisection stem. Its bark is thin and coarse, and a width of a single reed is about 1.5 inches. The reed has a core made of cellular tissue, which paper is made out of. The reed is split into two, and each half is sliced from the center of the stem. The pulp slices are then placed side by side on flat wooden surfaces. A second set of these slices are placed perpendicularly to the first layer, and they are stacked side by side. These slices are then soaked and are gently pressed with pieces of wood until they level out. They are then left to dry in the sun. The end result is a piece of paper ranging in size from 20 to 30 centimeters in width and 30 to 40 centimeters in length. It is easy to make files of varying lengths out of papyrus. Separate papers are bound together, where they are polished and pasted again until we obtain a roll that can reach 15 meters in length. Only one side of the papyrus would be used for writing, and it would be the side that had fibers that were horizontal, so that the pen that was used would be able to write with little to no resistance. The papyrus roll is then cut up into equal pieces, which are then written on and stacked on top of each other. It is used in corresponding messages, pamphlets, and manuscripts. Everything that nature made available to mankind has been used to aid them. Here we have papyrus paper. Thousands of them are preserved in libraries around the world. The Phoenicians transferred them to people around the world. We have received many letters and instruments that were written and described on papyrus, including papyrus from Hierakonpolis Magna. This papyrus dates back to 22 Hijri. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo has the oldest manuscript that is written on papyrus. This manuscript dates back to 4,500 years ago, and it contains details about the work the builders of the pyramid of the pharaoh Khufu partook in. It was found by a team of French and Egyptian archaeologists in Wadi al-Jarf on the coast of the Red Sea. Unfortunately, only fragments of the early works of Arab manuscripts that were written on papyrus have made their way to us. Among them are Mawti'a Malik bin Anas, the Journal of Humam bin Munabbih, and the Journal of Abdullah bin al-Hayya. The most complete manuscript that has reached us that was written on papyrus is the book titled A Collection of Prophetic Hadiths by Abdullah bin Wahb, who passed away in the year 97 Hijri in the region of Idfu in Upper Egypt, and it is now preserved in the Egyptian National Library. The year 323 Hijri witnessed the last known use of papyrus for writing as of now, as that century would be the last to witness the manufacturing of papyrus paper. With these words, we toured around the world of ancient papers, and in our modern times, we witnessed its great legacy, and in the lives of the ancients, it was a point of skill and craftsmanship. Phenomenal human innovation was written down upon their papyri, which still shines on till this very day.